And we're live. Georgi, Dinkov, how are you, sir?
I'm fine. Thanks for inviting me again.
Guys, let us know how the audio levels are. We were actually just catching up, and you were mentioning the study you were looking to do, right?
Yeah, that's right. So as I mentioned, I'm starting to do my own studies. Or, at the very least, I'll be directing them. It'll be hopefully my name will be there as a co-author. And the first study will be with a modified version of cortisone, our product. We're calling it cortisone plus because you'll have a slightly higher ratio of progesterone to DHEA. I think you put like a guide how to make like your own progesterone DHEA mixture in vitamin E. And I think you said like 3-to-1 ratio or something.
That was something I just parroted from Ray. So I don't have
Right.
like a very specific reason of 3-to-1. It was something. He was actually not super clear on why it was 3-to-1, but I know we've talked about this, but there's something about a healthy person producing about 15 milligrams of progesterone and 15 milligrams of DHEA,
Right.
and he had talked about how he used to use a mixture of a 1-to-1 ratio for people with arthritis, and it was useful. But then he was talking about for himself that he used a much higher proportion of progesterone.
Yeah, and I mean, I took all of these ratios and basically like I have a network of people that are willing to do these as guinea pigs and like because I send them free samples and they promise to do blood results, and then we noticed that with a ratio of like between 8-to-1 up to 10-to-1, the testosterone levels of males really crank up. And also, like some of these people are bodybuilders, and two of them felt like a ratio of 8-to-1, and they took basically like because we always cap it at the 5 milligram of DHEA per dosage, right? And no more than 15 per day. So if you do a ratio of 8-to-1, this means about 40 milligrams of progesterone per dose, up to 3 times daily. So let's say between 120 and 150 milligrams of progesterone, and then 15 milligrams of DHEA. So that stuff, two of these people said that basically works for them as good as their testosterone injections. And I take their word pretty, as pretty reliable because they're long-term bodybuilders. They've been doing this for a while. So these two people now, they don't inject testosterone anymore. So I was like, oh, wow, there must be something to it. And then I looked at the studies that were using progesterone for treating cancer and basically other severe chronic diseases in rodents. And they all used a dosage that would correspond to about 100 to 200 milligrams daily for progesterone. And then finally, that post that I made on the reversing aging with progesterone DHEA.
Yeah, we'll definitely get there.
Right. So, but I'm saying that it's not like I didn't come up with this 8-to-1 ratio out of nowhere. It's kind of like it's based on science and on people's experiences. So we're going to use this ratio and try to basically treat a really lethal cancer called Gaffey myeloid tumor in hamsters. And basically, the study starts this coming Monday. It's already started. But the first phase, according to the European Union laws, is I have to send the product for analysis, and then they do like a chromatograph analysis and see what's the absorption spectra of the product as a whole. So it's kind of like they need to check and verify that what I've sent really is vitamin E and MCT, and it contains progesterone, DHEA, in these right ratios. And then come Monday, basically they're gonna start like a 1 week in vitro study. They always try to do like these two both in vitro and in vivo, and then the week after that the in vivo study starts with hamsters. So it's going to continue for about 2 months. But so far everything looks fine. Knock on wood. Hopefully we'll have some results before the end of the year, and if that group works well, then basically after that I plan to do a lot of these studies that were done in the early 20th century that Ray keeps talking about, like the Burr study with causing essential fatty acid deficiency. I think that'll be very interesting.
That'd be awesome, yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll try to do like a methylene blue study for like anti-aging and life extension. Because so far there are no in vivo studies. They're all like with the in vitro cells in terms of extending lifespan. We'll try niacinamide for diabetes. We'll try progesterone DHEA for like a few autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis, things like that. So I mean that group seems like pretty versatile. Basically, they can create any in a hamster model. Most of the stuff is with hamsters, but they also have monkeys. So the most promising results we'll probably try to replicate in monkeys, which should be as close to humans as we can get, right? Without actually doing stuff on humans. So keeping fingers crossed. Hopefully some good things will come out of it. If nothing else, we'll learn a lot.
Dude, pushing the envelope, that is awesome. Okay, everybody, I turned up my volume a little bit and I turned Georgie down a little bit. So continue to let me know how it is. Did you say you were adding vitamin E to the cortisone in addition?
No, it's dissolved in vitamin E in the tocopherols, right? So
Ah,
it's basically the progesterone and DHEA are dissolved in tocopherols, and
has that
then
always been the recipe for that product?
well, we have two versions: one with ethanol and SF esters, and one with tocopherol and
Oh,
MCT.
cool. Nice.
Same thing for Progesterone, because people kept asking. Like some people like the non-greasy version that uses ethanol,
Hmm.
but others like to go with like race formula, and they've been asking for that. So we kind of have both
Cool. Nice.
for people that want to do. But we are using race formula in this one because we verified that when you take the tocopherol MCT version orally, which what hamsters prefer to do anyways, it has a much longer half-life. Like the one with SFA and ethanol, it absorbs very well transdermally, but irritates the hamster's skin. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, I sent him some samples over the summer to try
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to try both versions. And the people that take care of the hamsters, they said hamsters don't like it because it irritates their skin. They start fighting each other. Like basically, like whenever they have when the hamsters see that somebody has like a skin condition, they start ostracizing the hamster from the group, like because it's sick, right? They think
Mm-hmm.
it's like something's wrong, and then they bite that spot, and like it's basically it upsets the colony. So, but with the tocopherol MCT version, they just put a drop on like on their food pellets,
Uh-huh.
and they said hamsters love it. Like, so they actually suspect progesterone and DHEA, or one of the ingredients. Actually, we don't know which one. Maybe increasing dopamine because they noticed that the hamsters prefer the food that had the cortisone versus the food that didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something in there that's making the hamsters love it. So I'm hoping that it's because they feel it's making them healthier, and I trust the animal's instincts more than I trust, the logic of a doctor. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, that's cool because that Tocovit product is so original and unique to you, and so it's nice that you're like mixing it in with the other steroids. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, let's get to. Let me switch screens here. Okay, if you guys are new, all super chats are donated to Raymond Pete PhD, and we'll read them at the end. We have a chronic contest going on, and you can enter if you like the stream, if you leave a comment, and you're subscribed. And then we've been doing these every other week. This is our 11th episode now. And so consider subscribing, even though YouTube's algorithm has, I think, like tanked my channel. And there's something mysterious has happened, and like all my videos have. I don't really pay attention to the analytics, but they've done some big algorithm switch, and most of my videos have like fallen off the face of the planet. And so
Nothing mysterious, Danny. Remember we talked about it. So
I know we do.
Google is
We're
censoring.
definitely hitting keywords that are not desirable, and so I'm not shocked by this, but it is interesting, and also like I keep researching YouTube alternatives. I'm very keen on finding one, but I don't want to find one that sucks and put a lot of energy into it and find out that like there was one called like VidMe, I think, that just went under,
Yeah.
and then they sent out a message to everybody saying they weren't around anymore. And so I just want to, the one that I do put effort into, I just want it to be kind of a solid deal. And so far right now, I don't feel like anything is like the alternative to YouTube yet, unfortunately.
Well, what about putting the videos like on your own site and,
Yeah,
and having them stream from there
that is
eventually?
for sure something I need to sack up and do because there's no reason not to do that. Anyways, okay, so another kind of piece of news: the live stream schedule next September. Oh, this is the 20th,
Yeah.
October 4th. We're gonna have Nicholas Simpson on. So I mentioned Nicholas in one of my videos, but he like specializes in exercise. I think he has some formal background. So I think he has a very high level understanding of things. And so I think you and him chatting and me being a dumb bystander will be interesting to have because he's very focused on exercise. And again, he's a very interesting dude and has lots of interesting experiences. So he'll be on October 4th. Then, Georgia, I didn't really hit you up about this, but that next week, we should probably do our last show on Friday, October 11th. And if you're available, and because I'm basically moving and I have to sell my computer. And so I need enough time to sell my computer. And if I wait till the very last second, that's just going to be a really bad situation. And we're going to take a November and December break, unfortunately, and then come back in January of 2020. And the real linchpin to us coming back sooner is me just being able to buy a computer when I'm traveling that will be able to run the actual software of the live stream, because it's just like brings my iMac to its knees running all this stuff. And so I need to buy like a really powerful laptop. And so if I can buy one in November or December, and if Georgie's available, we could start doing them up again, because neither of us want to stop this. But unfortunately, my travel plans I made them a long time ago.
So are you abandoning Mexico for good, or?
We'll see. I don't. We'll talk about it later. But yeah, I think the next chapter of where I am is changing.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. Okay, and then Craig Doe, you are the winner of the very generous Idea Labs giveaway from Georgie. And so thank you so much, Craig, and thank you, Georgie, for making that possible. And Craig, you need to email me at danny@dannyroddy.com. Is there anything else before we get into the news stuff? Hey, everybody in the chat. I know I don't recognize you guys enough, but I sincerely appreciate everybody in the chat. You guys are amazing. We have a amazing viewership. Sandy, I saw that you said hello. I got to touch base with Sandy, who's an amazing person. So yeah. Anything else, Georgie?
I think that's about it for now. Basically, I mean, there's a new product upcoming. I don't know if you want to talk about it now.
Yeah, please mention it.
So several people emailed me over the last year asking about camphoric acid. And it's basically, I mean, it is a derivative of camphor. It's basically dicarboxylic camphor. But unlike camphor, it doesn't smell like, basically it's very much unlike camphor. And it was used back in the day before the advent of antibiotics, or at least before they became widely available. It was used as an intestinal disinfectant. And it was basically kind of like an antibiotic alternative. It was used in hospitals. It was basically an approved drug in hospitals for basically like sterilizing the intestine. And somebody emailed Ray, and Ray sent back an email saying like he had like a white tongue or something, like a thrush several times, and he took just 100 or 200 milligrams of camphoric acid and immediately cleared it up. So he basically said it could be really effective, like as a replacement for antibiotics. So that will be the next product, which should be available within the next week or so.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know. It just has antibiotic action. That's the main thing.
That's what it was used for. But if you look up camphoric acid, you'll see that it was also used to like lower fever in people with tuberculosis. And since the fever is known to be caused by elevated serotonin and endotoxin, so it probably has. I mean, clearly, if it's an intestinal disinfectant, it will probably lower endotoxin, but it seems to have some direct anti-serotonin effect as well. It's not that studied. Most of the studies are with camphor itself, and actually most of the cultures around the world that use it, they use the camphor itself. But camphoric acid it's actually part of the USP compendium, and to this day, if you go and look it up, it will basically say its two primary purposes. It's still technically it's still an FDA approved drug in the United States. It's just not used anymore. And the two indications which it was approved was intestinal parasitosis, or bacterial overgrowth, and fever associated with tuberculosis. So we're hoping that, I mean, the reason we're bringing this as a product is the former. Many people either don't have antibiotics, don't react well to them, or are afraid of bacterial resistance and things like that. So hopefully the camphoric acid will be able to provide some of those benefits and be over the counter.
Cool, brother. You want to start with the reversing aging possible with progesterone DHEA?
Yeah, I think that's I got so many emails about this stuff.
Well, I think did David Sinclair, what's his name? David Sinclair, didn't he go on Joe Rogan and maybe they talked about it too? So it seems like a huge story
it's a huge story.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking about the HGH metformin. This article?
Yeah, it is this article.
Yeah. Okay.
I said that it's reversible because basically my article, like the gist of my article, covers that, right?
Yeah.
But it says that's such a crappy way of going about this, because if you actually read about HGH and if you look the actual study that's on which the popular press articles are based, the authors themselves say right there in the study, they're like, yeah, we used human growth hormone, but number one, it causes diabetes, and number two, actually, it can actually destroy the thymus if you're not careful. And
Yeah,
I
it's
was
just
like, what?
because growth hormone induced hyperinsulinemia is
Yeah,
undesirable and might affect thymic regeneration and immunological reconstitution.
yeah.
Yeah,
So why would you use it to start with then? That's ridiculous. So, anyways, but I think it's a good study because remember, up until this study came out, the official story was aging is irreversible. It's an entropic process. That's the official version. Simply, it's just as time goes by, we fall apart, and just like the scrambled egg, we cannot be unscrambled. I mean, this story has been going on since time immemorial. I think it's part of the religious story, right? It's the corruption of the matter. Like we are just made to be falling apart, and there's nothing that can reverse that process. Well, this study said not so fast. Biological aging, as far as the immune system, and which is mostly driven by the size and the functionality of the thymus gland, this portion of it, at the very least, that portion can be reversed, right? And then they said right there in the study, just by using this combination of human growth hormone, DHEA, and metformin, they effectively, they did the therapy for about 12 months. The first 9 months was like, about a year and a half of worth of biological aging reversal. And then the reversal really accelerated the last 3 months. And towards the end of the trial, towards basically the end of the 12 months, they saw like 6.5 years of basically biological aging reversal. Now, keep in mind that most people around the world, they don't live to see 60. So that's like more than 10% of their age essentially being given back to them. That's huge.
Yeah.
Huge. But like the study upset me because they don't hide it. They tell you human growth hormone is really it's got all of these risks. It has pro-aging effects, etc., etc. Then they talk about metformin, right? So they don't claim in that study. They said that metformin and DHEA, they don't have thymoprotective effects of their own. They don't think the metformin or DHEA contributed in any way. As far as DHEA, I immediately call BS because you just need a simple Google, not Google, but even Google or PubMed search. Just type DHEA and thymus, and you'll get a ton of results. I mean, so long story short, the thymus is one of the organs that's most sensitive to the levels of cortisol and estrogen. So anything that opposes cortisol and or estrogen is likely to, at the very least, stop the destruction of the thymus and in many cases reverse it. DHEA being one of the main endogenous glucocorticoids, you would expect it to have thymotrophic effects. And there you go. You have at least 10 studies there in that thread that I've posted that show exactly that. And then you have progesterone, which is the endogenous antagonist, probably the most potent one of both cortisol and estrogen. And lo and behold, there is a study in vivo study with progesterone, which even showed the optimal dosage of progesterone for reversing thymus atrophy. Because if you use too little or too much, like basically at very high dosages, progesterone actually starts to behave a little bit like a glucocorticoid. So its anti-inflammatory effects start to overtake all the others. But unlike cortisol, it's not gonna destroy your skin or your brain or melt you away. Actually, it has a good effect. It raises your metabolism. It's almost like like taking too much T3. So even if you take it in excess, it won't be nearly as bad as a high dosage of cortisol. So basically, I just posted the studies there and evidence showing that a combination of progesterone and DHEA has already been shown to fully reverse the atrophy of the thymus because of under the effects of either excess cortisol, excess estrogen, or in general aging. And then I just gave what the dosages according to the studies were. And one thing that most people are not aware of is that estrogen is apparently just like cortisol, is highly detrimental to the thymus. And one study that I posted on the forum about 2 years ago showed that giving people aromatase inhibitors completely restores the health of the immune system back to their youthful levels. And most of that effect was due to the fact that the thymus regenerated. So cortisol is highly catabolic for the thymus. It's an immunosuppressant in a very direct way. Aside from its effects on activating retroviruses or or promoting bacterial growth, all of these things aside, estrogen, just like cortisol, has a direct immunosuppressive effect by destroying the thymus gland. So yeah, I mean, basically they use DHEA in a very high dosage, 50 milligrams a day, in that reversal of the aging study, which almost guarantees that you will jack up your estrogen. So it's kind of like DHEA had a chance of really shining that study, but the study was handicapped, and it was designed clearly in a way to make the human growth hormone take center stage. Because guess what? HGH is only available by injection. I think the 3 brands that are available in the market in the United States are all very expensive. They're patented. I don't know how, but even though it's a generic peptide. So I think this study was done as a way to spur sales of metformin and human growth hormone. But as my post says, I think we can do better with over-the-counter ingredients and without the side effects that the study discusses.
Yeah, well, it was 50 milligrams of DHEA used daily. That's just like a gigantic dose. I had a doctor, like an anti-aging doctor, prescribe me 50 milligrams 3 times per day. Yeah. So yeah, that is crazy. And I feel like the growth hormone aspect is something that gets super little play. I think we probably talked about it before, but the idea that you do not want high growth hormone, I think, is extremely foreign. And again, I think it's easy to contextualize when you learn that growth hormone is this pro-lipolytic and surprisingly pro-diabetes hormone. So I laughed while reading this because you were totally right. It's just like a crazy concoction study. So
I mean, they themselves say, they give you the disclaimer right in their own study saying like, yeah, we chose growth hormone, but guess what? It can give you diabetes and actually it can destroy your thymus. So then the question really, I actually emailed the study authors. They haven't responded back. And I gave the email address and the name of the lead author of the study. I think his name is Gahy or something, Ghay. Please email that person and ask them like, why would they design such a study? Why would you even start with human growth hormone, considering there are better alternatives? And some of the statements that are in the study there, like, these people cannot be that ignorant. Anybody who studies anti-aging should know that the DHEA has powerful trophic effects on the thymus if used at the right dosage, right? Mm-hmm. To make a statement like, and they say DHEA is not known to have any anti-aging or thymotrophic effects on its own. That's just the most ridiculous thing to me. It's like either this thing was ghost written and they didn't proofread it before they published it, or they didn't do their homework, or the study was done, which I suspect is probably the case. Could be a combination of the 3, of course. I think the study is simply geared to sell more growth hormone. I mean, I'm sure this is like the crazy thing among athletes right now. The growth hormone is all the rage.
Oh, for sure. No, I know it's commonly used for that, and I'm in a bad habit of listening to Joe Rogan, and he talks about it pretty often as well. So I know that I feel like it's long been used in the anti-aging scene, and so that's why it's so surprising that it's like a pro-aging hormone, but that makes more sense given Ray's painting of the system and the pituitary being this pro-aging gland. Basically, you want to keep it as quiet as possible via that W.D. Denkla dude.
And actually growth hormone, I can send you some links, but a number of companies in the United States are working on developing a biomarker using growth hormone as a test for cancer. Mm-hmm. And it is a non-specific but highly reliable biomarker for cancer. Mm-hmm. By non-specific, I mean it cannot tell you which type of cancer you have, but it's highly sensitive. Meaning that beyond a certain level, if your growth hormone levels are elevated beyond a certain range, most certainly there's cancer going on somewhere. So like it's definitely not something you want to play around with and inject chronically for 12 months, in the hope that a minor portion of its benefit would be to regenerate your thymus.
A huge low carb person, I remember, tweeted at me or like added my name in a tag. But it was something about fasting raises growth hormone like 300%. Yeah. And it was like, this is what these petards don't understand, is that the fasting raises the growth hormone. And I thought it was so funny and ironic because it's like, yeah, I don't think that's good.
Carcinogenic.
Yeah.
I've posted. I mean, even WebMD has a huge warning. This mouthpiece of the mainstream medicine industry is basically telling has a huge warning saying you have to be careful with growth hormone. Even we us doctors, we don't like it very much. We don't fool around with it.
Well, speaking of aging, you can't see it on the screen, but I have up here are you familiar with that Alexis Carrel? Ray sometimes talks about him, but it's an old book, and it says colonies obtained from a heart fragment removed in January 1912 from a chick embryo are growing as actively today as 23 years ago. In fact, they are immortal. And so I always thought that was funny, but that was Ray's point, that when somebody asked him about if aging was this thing that we all had to go through, he mentioned this as a way of saying that he didn't think the tissues had to inherently age, and he referenced this because they were just replacing the medium, I think, in the dish. And so that's like the idea that there's something in our blood that is aging the tissues, and obviously that being the hormones and all the signaling substances.
Actually, it's mostly the elevated free fatty acids. Remember the studies on parabiosis, where they connected an old animal to a young one, and then they the old studies didn't know what the factor was, right? It was pretty clear young blood rejuvenates old animals, but they didn't know what the factor was. They thought it was hormonal, and it probably does play an effect. But more recent studies have found out that basically the older the animal, the more handicapped its capacity to oxidize glucose is. And lately they've been saying that it's probably because the free fatty acids are 3 to 4 times higher in an aged animal than they are in the young one. So things like aspirin, niacinamide, anything that lowers lipolysis, it may mimic to a degree the effects of parabiosis.
So the parabiosis is when you combine them, that's lowering the level of free fatty acids. Is that what you're saying? By dilution or something?
Exactly. Yeah. So when you connect the blood systems of the two animals, effectively you're getting, well, first the older animal is going to get some of the youth promoting hormones, right? But also because the free fatty acids are so much lower in a younger, leaner, more metabolically active animal, the older animal is going to get more T3, a lot less on average per unit of blood, and a lot lower free fatty acids. So more recent studies have actually starting to make the claim that it's this sort of diabetes state, aging diabetes, diabetes of the age, which is I think called diabetes type 3 or something like that. Okay. Old people diabetes. That's what's really causing all of these things, because we know that diabetes type 2 in a relatively younger person, somebody in their 30s or their 40s, they're exhibiting all of the organ failures and in generally tissue aging that are seen in very old people. So disease and aging are really the same process. It's just one of them is just an accelerated version of the other. And now basically studies have come out and said we are seeing when a very old person starts to go into organ failure and die, they're actually indistinguishable. Their metabolic state is indistinguishable from a younger person who has type 2 diabetes. So that's why I think these newer studies are kind of saying it's probably the elevated free fatty acids that are a big factor of this pathology that we call aging. But now they're starting to lobby the FDA and starting to use it more and more and saying it's not a natural process. We shouldn't think that way because we're biasing people. It biases the research. And I kept thinking to that study that I posted. I think we discussed last time when star researchers die, then the youngsters that we discussed with Jahed, the truth can finally come out because there's nobody else left to suppress it.
Well, we kind of already went over it, but did you somebody posted on the Ray Peep forum something saying it's not glucose that causes diabetes, it's the free fatty acids. Did you catch that article?
I have that on the blog as well. I mean, basically, So it's called I think my title is fatty acid buildup and inflammation is not glucose is what drives diabetes.
Okay, this was from a little while ago, right?
Yeah, it was from August.
Ah, okay. Okay. Oh, so they just okay. That wasn't brand new. I thought
It
it
was
was
a
today.
duplicate. Is a duplicate post or something. But I don't want to go to the thread and say, hey, that's my stuff, right? I mean, if they posted it and it spurs a good discussion, by all means, I like discussion.
One last thing before we move on. Do you think the lipid peroxidation is that uncontroversial pro aging aspect? Because there was a paper that I stole from somebody, but they basically said the lipid peroxidation lights the mitochondria on fire. Like that was the
Wow.
imagery they were saying. But that is the really offensive part of the. I mean, I know there are lots of aspects that are bad about the free fatty acids, but that's one of the worst ones.
And it's also the lipid peroxidation is necessary for lipofuscin to form,
Ah, yeah.
and that's really what ultimately by building up inside the mitochondria, that's probably the main structural change that occurs with aging. That's probably responsible for a good portion of the slowdown of metabolism. Aside from well, actually they feed off into each other. Like it's not just one causing the other. They actually affect each other. So when you get more lipofuscin, less mitochondrial activity, less oxidative phosphorylation, more glycolysis, etc., etc. So less youthful hormones being produced, less carbon dioxide, which in turn basically stimulates the stress hormones. You get more free fatty acids in the blood. If they're PUFA, more lipid peroxidation, more lipofuscin, etc., and on it goes. So it's really, but it is, yes, it is the lipid peroxidation process that drives this. And it reminds me of a study that I read on this blog that I used to read years ago, Ergolog. You may be familiar with it.
Maybe. Go ahead. Yeah, I think so.
So vitamin E had very high hopes in terms of being an anti-aging nutrient, precisely because of its ability to inhibit this peroxidation of unsaturated fats. And actually, some of the early studies from the first half of the 20th century were very positive. They saw life extension of maximum lifespan, not average, in a number of different models. And of course, the pharmaceutical industry took over, poo-pooed all over this research. They sponsored some ghost written studies that said, no, this vitamin E is dangerous. I'm sure you've seen they did human trials for prostate cancer with vitamin E and selenium.
Oh, yeah.
And then they came out and said, oh, vitamin E actually increases risk of death, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, because some of these star researchers died, some new studies have come out and they said that, yes, vitamin E actually is a pretty potent life extender, but you have to take it for a while to see the basically the benefits manifested in themselves. And they said that the minimum time of taking it in order for you to see significant benefit was 2 to 4 years. And reminded me of Ray's statement that it takes 2 to 4 years to change the tissue composition of fats, right? So, and they actually made the same argument. They said that they're not sure whether vitamin E displaces like the unsaturated fat from the tissues or simply gets accumulated to a level where lipid peroxidation is largely eliminated. But they also agree that it is the polyunsaturated fats that are driving like a huge portion of the degenerative changes seen with aging. They didn't say lipofuscin, but they mentioned a number of different things like the chronic inflammation. They even said the estrogenicity of PUFA, which is pretty rare to see in a journal.
Yeah.
They usually try to portray estrogen in a very positive light, but not that study. I mean, since it was about vitamin E, I was kind of expecting them to poo-poo over PUFA anyways, but it was rare to see that statement, and it was there. So yeah, I mean, vitamin E, they found out that it increases maximum lifespan of a hamster model by about 30 to 40%, which is not a small amount. I mean, think about it. For a human, that means living to, I don't know, 150, something like that.
Well, didn't Ray say a few times there was like some concentrated effort to just totally like dump on some vitamin? And I think maybe vitamin A was the one that the pharma industry like really. He said they were like hundreds of articles published really quickly about how toxic it was or something when it threatens the value of some drug that they have.
Exactly. I think it's either A or D, because like lately I've been seeing, because I have some Google alerts set up for different things, and vitamin D basically, like some of the latest studies that have come out are really they're scary sounding. Like if you take too much vitamin D, will actually break up your bones. Vitamin D worse than useless for cancer prevention. Vitamin D drives like dementia, or all of these things. And actually, when you click on them, every single one of them was, first of all, was observational, which means some statistician was paid to play a game with numbers. And as was it Abraham Lincoln who said, facts are stubborn, statistics is pliable or manageable or something like that. So with an observational study, you can generate just about any conclusion you want. I mean, you can exclude data you don't like. You can pivot it in a certain way. You can slice it and dice it any way you want. So anyways, if you look at the studies that found negative effects of vitamin D, overwhelmingly they're observational, and the small number that were interventional, they used either very low doses of vitamin D or extremely high. And usually they neglect things like calcium intake. So clearly, if you're taking 50,000 units or 20,000 units a day of vitamin D and your calcium intake is not high, you're asking for trouble. I mean, of course, you're going to get soft tissue calcification if vitamin D isn't paired up with sufficient calcium and vitamin K. All right. But these things are not addressed in those studies. So you can, with enough money, you can actually get a study to say pretty much anything you want.
Well, I feel like you've been around. I'm not saying I'm some old timer or whatever, but like since getting into nutrition in like 2000, probably being interested around like 2007, you definitely see that like a vitamin will come into vogue, and then within a certain time, you'll start reading tons of bad stuff about it. And that happened with virtually like anything you can think of, from vitamin D to vitamin C to vitamin K. And this is just like the tiny amount that I've actually been paying attention to things. And so
Steph, who is the moderator, is she the moderator on the forum?
Yeah, she's here, I think.
So she sent me basically an email about Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. And apparently when she was in college, she did some study with some kind of an antioxidant. So there aren't that many. I mean, it's one of these vitamins, either C, E, or possibly D. And she wanted to publish it, but apparently, like, I forgot who Steph said but it was somebody like above her, either her thesis advisor or somebody else, who said absolutely no way our pharma sponsors will kill us. And she basically, like, her research, I think, found that this thing extends lifespan by like a double-digit percentage, and the publication was shot down by her boss at the university, who said this cannot see the light of day. We're just gonna lose so much. I mean, they're gonna stop funding us if we publish something like that. So it would be interesting if we can get maybe I'll email her, AOC, and say, like, what was that? But now that she's elected a politician, she'll probably be very careful about what she says.
Some of the things I think, I'm not like a huge fan of his or anything, but Bernie, I think after one of the Democratic debates, was talking to reporters, and he was riffing on pharma, or big pharma, and like I think it might have been CNN or MSNBC, and he was saying some pretty bad things about big pharma, and then the newscaster like awkwardly got in the shot like from behind the camera, and it was like, back to you guys. And like that stuff makes me laugh so hard, because it's so obvious what they're doing, and they do similar things. When anybody starts speaking about something real on the news, they'll cut them off or whatever. But it's so blatant.
We're going for a commercial break.
Yeah.
Right?
But he was like in the middle of a sentence, and then the guy like gets into the frame in a really awkward way.
Not surprised at all. I mean,
we'll see how that Green New Deal does.
Yeah, I'm sure. It will just redirect the money from one bad cause to another.
Okay, did you want to get to the oral testosterone one? That was highly charged.
That generated also a lot of controversy. I got a number of emails about that one too. So it was actually spurred by discussion on the forum. Somebody posted a news announcement that FDA recently approved a testosterone ester, testosterone undecanoate, which is, I think, lauric acid, basically undecanoic acid. So it's a testosterone ester, testosterone with a fatty acid, and it's available as pill, and basically you take it orally. And FDA approved it as treatment for hypogonadism for males. And I've known for a long time that and Ray has spoken about it several times, that pharmaceutical industry did a number of different tricks and fake studies and whatnot to convince the public that for some reason steroids are orally ineffective, they're either not absorbed or they're quickly eliminated by the liver or whatever reason. But to this day, if you talk to any doctor who has an MD, they will flat out tell you that you can't take testosterone. You can't take, but if you talk about progesterone, pregnenolone, DHEA, that doctor that prescribed to you like 50 milligrams of DHEA 3 times a day, clearly he didn't think that this is useless, right? I mean, clearly he thought you would absorb and it would have like a, sufficient effect. And there are hundreds of studies with DHEA and progesterone, actually, oral progesterone. There are even products, Prometrium, Utrogestan in Europe. There are a number of different oral products which are progesterone dissolved in peanut oil. So nobody's questioning the bioavailability of these steroids. Yet somehow when it comes to the androgens, especially the ones that are banned by the FDA, that FDA doesn't want the general public to use, the message is don't waste your time and money. If you ingest testosterone, it will be worthless. You'll be next to useless, and you'll be just throwing money down the drain. Well, if you look at the studies that I posted, actually, it was the unesterified, in other words, free/base testosterone that was highly bioavailable compared to the reason I like the study a lot is that actually tested free testosterone and compared it to precisely testosterone undecanoate that FDA got approved, and they found that basically the only time when testosterone undecanoate is useful is if it's not only so this is already an ester, right? It has to be dissolved in oil and it has to be taken with food. But if you look at the FDA's public announcement, they don't say any of those things. First of all, the testosterone undecanoate is not available as a product dissolved in oil. It's just a pill. It's basically a powder, right? But that study showed that if you take the testosterone undecanoate as a pill without it being dissolved in oil, it doesn't raise blood concentrations. And it doesn't matter if you take it with food or not. It was useless. So it was the ester that was useless and not the base/free testosterone. And then there are a number of different studies that I posted at the same time that show that, some of them are by the same group, that they treated successfully eunuchs that were completely hypogonadal with oral free/base testosterone in a dosage of around 200 milligrams a day, and these people were capable of living as perfectly functional normal males with that treatment. And that same group says there is zero justification for using testosterone esters and or the more toxic androgenic anabolic steroids that are currently in use, especially the ones that are 7-alpha alkylated. So these are the bodybuilders use these as the oral equivalent. So there's a version of testosterone, 7-alpha methyl testosterone. It's known as the orally working, the orally effective version of testosterone. Crap, that's not true. It's actually, and those studies say that these things are liver toxic and cause liver cancer. So and they actually did another study where they administered 400 milligrams daily of this free/base testosterone I think it was for up to a year, just to see, because there's always a concern among doctors that if you take too much testosterone, it's going to do something bad to your blood pressure, your heart, your cholesterol, your liver, right? None of these things happened. None. In fact, the parameters of the people who took these massive doses of testosterone improved. Actually, the liver started working better and started metabolizing. Basically, the testosterone improved the liver's ability to metabolize xenobiotics, these toxic substances that we ingest every day. So if anything, their liver function became even better. So there is zero rationale for FDA to approve this ester other than it's patented and some company is going to make billions of dollars of profit on it. But if you can get free testosterone, it's the cheapest thing out there. If you can get your doctor to give you a prescription, and it's just as effective, if not more effective, than any of these toxic derivatives or these expensive derivatives that FDA approves.
Yeah, I feel like the experience or in general and talking to people using testosterone, I remember being interested in the testosterone using for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which I guess has been studied. But I always feel like it's a short-term gain, long-term pain kind of thing, because I think correct me if I'm wrong, it is kind of a risky thing to do.
Yes, but I think the reason I like this study so much is because apparently So it's like whenever the pharmaceutical industry gets into some kind of a business or an idea or a drug, it usually messes things up. Like they will try to develop their own version with the underlying idea is always is patentability, profitability, sales, right? But they will tell you things like, oh, this is like progesterone, but it's better. That was the whole idea behind developing the synthetic progestins, right? And only later on we found out that no, actually they're not like progesterone. Yes, they do work on the same receptor, but they also work on many other receptors. They're estrogenic. They are androgenic. They're carcinogenic. So it turned out that the pharma industry introduced a number of different toxic drugs by lying that they'll do the same thing as this progesterone, right? So I'm not saying that people should use testosterone. I'm trying to say that if you are going to use testosterone, don't go don't believe the hype that the FDA puts out there. There's studies, and don't believe your doctor's lies. I mean, actively challenge your doctor by showing these studies that were with humans. Some of them went on for years and showed that free/base testosterone is less harmful. Actually, according to those studies, not harmful at all, even in massive dosages, right? While the testosterone esters and some of the synthetic derivatives, especially the methylated ones, are hugely toxic. That's really the gist of the study. It's not meant to say basically, oh, go out there and abuse testosterone. No, it's if you have to use testosterone, most of the stuff you're going to hear from your doctor and or the FDA is crap, complete crap. So use this evidence, go back to your doctor and say, why don't you give me a prescription for regular testosterone and I'll figure it out from there. Like don't poison me with whatever samples this company that develops the T-ester is giving you.
You're right. I would have no way to delineate like the bad effects from testosterone from the fillers and the special ester forms. And do you know of any product like that's a base testosterone that is available?
No, you can a compounding pharmacy will give you that, right? But basically, like, you have to have a prescription. But there's nothing approved by the FDA. FDA has approved testosterone for treatment of hypogonadism. But if you go to a doctor and say, I want testosterone, the doctor will be like, well, let me give you an injection. And if you say, no, I don't want an injection, it will be very much an uphill fight.
Or androgel.
Or androgel, yeah, right. So they'll either push for a transdermal like testosterone, which is probably not bad. It's actually, if I have to rank them in terms of least dangerous to most dangerous, least dangerous will be the free/base testosterone orally dissolved in tocopherol and oil. Second best will be one of these gels, assuming they don't have any toxic solvents in them that can get into your blood and cause all kinds of allergic reactions. And actually, anything that triggers an allergic reaction or skin irritation immediately activates the enzyme aromatase. So if that gel is causing even like a local skin irritation, you can bet that a good portion of the testosterone you just administered gets converted to estrogen before it even reaches your blood. So that would be in the middle. And then my last preference would be these testosterone esters that are now being approved as oral drugs, or the testosterone injections, or worst case scenario, one of the injected synthetic steroids, with a possible exception of some of the DHT derivatives that I posted about. Drostanolone is one of them. It's basically DHT that was developed for treatment of breast cancer. To this day, it is approved in the United States for treatment of breast cancer. It's known as Masteron. So that would be the only synthetic steroid that I would consider. It's one of the few that's been shown to benefit the liver and not poison it.
What was I going to say? Yeah, I think in Mexico there's a product called low-carb. I don't know how to say that properly, but I think it's similar to androgel, and it's like a 1% product. And so if you are going to use 1 milligram of it, it's topically, it's like ridiculously small, and a normal dose of testosterone is like a whole packet, which would cover like a whole leg or something. So and again, this is I'm getting ahead of myself, but Ray was asked on somebody posted his reply, and he was like, yeah, if your nutrition is good, your vitamin E, your progesterone, your DHEA, your magnesium, your protein, your vitamin D, then 1 milligram in vitamin E might be safe. And so,
and just as I mentioned earlier, like we're finding out now in humans that like a decent amount of progesterone plus a little bit of DHEA apparently somehow either feeds into the testosterone pathway or does something else metabolically. But like I said, these two bodybuilders are showing signs of essentially using testosterone, but they're not. They're only using progesterone and DHEA. So if that works out, I mean, we're going to do some blood tests, but if that gets confirmed, and we'll see from the hamster study as well, that'll be huge news. I mean, we'll have a much safer version, right? Because progesterone and DHEA are the preferable hormones to use, even compared to testosterone, and it'll be available over the counter. Hopefully, the FDA doesn't move in and ban progesterone because DHEA is safe. I think DHEA was specifically exempt by a law passed in the 1930s. Progesterone and pregnenolone are not. The FDA tolerates them, but keep in mind, if a company petitions FDA that it wants these two steroids banned because they interfere with sales or they're so quote unquote unapproved drugs, FDA is allowed legally to block their sales. Not DHA, but pregnenolone and progesterone definitely. And allopregnanolone is now approved as an antidepressant. And in one of the, I think in Ray's latest newsletter, he talks about using progesterone as a reliable precursor of allopregnanolone. So the more of these steroids that get approved that are derived from pregnenolone and progesterone, the more of these steroids that get approved for some bad conditions, the more likely it becomes that eventually FDA will make a move on pregnenolone and progesterone because they're not protected by a law.
Well, to your point, like DHEA opposes cortisol, and I would suspect that a lot of the guys that are experiencing hypogonadism have elevated cortisol. So it's not, I imagine a small dose of testosterone might also protect against that cortisol, but it wouldn't be, or at least the way I thought about it, since I always had high prolactin, and I have at least one paper that says if a person has hypogonadism, you need to work on the prolactin to get it down. And so like it's almost like the low testosterone is a symptom. And I have a paper up here, but it talks about how in like stress and aging, there's a dissociation between DHEA and cortisol. And I know we've talked about this before, right, but usually I think the idea is that cortisol rises during stress, but if the stress is very prolonged or the person's malnourished or it's just like a chronic stress and the thyroid function gets suppressed, you start producing proportionally less DHEA, but the cortisol is basically unopposed.
Stays. Yeah, exactly. So your cortisol kind of peaks in your 20s and basically doesn't decline with age. It stays constant. But what does decline is the testosterone and DHEA because of the declining thyroid function, right, and declining precursors. So it's the ratio of cortisol to testosterone and cortisol to DHEA that has been shown to be the real predictor of frailty and illness and some specific conditions like PTSD, bipolar disorder, like actually cheating at work or on your spouse or your partner or whatnot. All of these things have recently been tied to an elevated cortisol to testosterone or cortisol to DHEA ratio.
Just one more thing. There is a paper, and it basically said, there's like a paraphrase, but it's like DHEA increases well-being and counteracts the effects of aging. Therefore, it shouldn't be available to the public. I think I've said this before, but it makes me laugh every single time.
Well, it's right there in writing that the things that are good for you are arguably suppressed, like officially as part of official health policy.
Not to go too much on a rabbit hole, but I feel like that anti-meat campaign, this is something I think the carnivore people are actually good on, like raising awareness about I know the food supply is already terrible, but this whole anti-meat thing is really, I think, frightening.
Ridiculous. It's a way to lower the cost of basically feeding the population while either keeping prices the same or even increasing them, which ultimately results in more profits for the food industry. And if even the studies, I just posted this, like the vegetarians have a higher risk of stroke. I think you saw that.
Yeah.
So it's like the evidence is very, very flimsy on the benefits of a completely vegan diet on health. There is some evidence in terms of cholesterol, but again, like as we found out, and even like the mainstream medicine admits, is like declining cholesterol in people over 60 is a really bad sign. Yeah. Like usually cancer or something else is drastically declining, and it's not a good sign. Actually, your doctor will get worried. If you're not on statin and you're over 60 and your cholesterol starts to drop, your doctor will get worried, and they know that. So I haven't seen any solid evidence on why we need to jump on a vegan diet like ASAP. The
Well,
only argument that I've seen is from PETA, because basically like they can appeal to I guess to emotion and say, well, you don't want to kill Bobo the chimp or like whatever the whatever animals that you're about to
well,
eat.
the scary thing, the triggering me being afraid was the Amazon rainforest thing, and that's at least there might be other incidences, but that's when people were saying there were articles and things like "stop eating meat" or whatever. You're burning down the Amazon, and again, it's just like the thickest propaganda about so-called greenhouse gases and things. But I don't know why. You know, I'm not really in touch with everything that's happening in the culture. But the things I like immunize myself from news, so I don't seek out stories or anything. But the fact that I felt like on multiple avenues, I was seeing the idea of eating meat being tied in with so-called global warming or whatever, and it seemed pretty sketchy.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I told you National Geographic went completely meatless.
Yeah, you said that.
It's I try to sign up, like we try to form a camp of the meat lovers, and I think I told you, like, we sent an email to the latest. There's a nutritionist on staff that's responsible for like deciding on a menu in the cafeteria every day, and she basically, like, we sent her an email and she came back with this really angry email, basically saying like, how dare you, like, tell me who the staff members at National Geographic are that are aligning with you. Like, they're not supposed to be doing this. This is a violation of policy. I need to know their names ASAP. So I'm like, oh, crap. What did I do? Well, I didn't tell her the names, but you know, it definitely hit a nerve. So right now, if you go to National Geographic cafeteria, you cannot find meat unless you go to the burger stand. And they're about to replace those with the what's the name of that new burger that they're doing?
Oh, Beyond Burger.
Beyond Burger, yeah.
Well,
So,
you're in DC. That is like the epicenter of this cultural change, right?
oh
So
yeah,
you're
yeah.
like, I feel like I didn't know this, but people have compared it to San Francisco of how progressive it is. Is that right?
Very much so, and you know, National Geographic is spearheading many of these cultural, like, progressive efforts. They host like these like mini talks, and this nutritionist who decides on the menu of the cafeteria, she basically hosts like these consulting sessions for free with the public, and it's every Thursday. So you go into this huge auditorium, and all they talk about is basically going vegan. I mean, she doesn't make any secret of it. She's vegan herself. She's a member of PETA, surprisingly, and all they discuss is recipes. And essentially, she hands out these flyers, and now she has an army of people, young people living in DC, who go out and distribute these things for free, for like on behalf of the National Geographic. I'm like, isn't your mission like basically like, you know, kind of like photographing the planet and doing like this cool biological research and geography and whatnot? What do you like? Why are you involved in like in the veganism? Like, what does that have to do with your mission? But you can ask questions like that. They'll gang up on you immediately.
The vegan is the proxy warrior of the oligarch.
That's right.
Okay, what do I have this screen? Oh, what article did you want to talk about next? There's the cholesterol and saturated fat are anabolic. PUFA and MUFA are akin to chemical castration.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that many people will be surprised by that, but you know, there's some good studies in there. They found out that cholesterol essentially is the one predictive factor of actually building up muscle mass in old people 65 and older. It wasn't protein actually, and you know, and actually they looked at the different intakes. Cholesterol was the only thing that was correlated, and it immediately reminded me of there was a bodybuilder nicknamed the Iron Guru, Vince.
Oh, Vince Garanda.
Yes, exactly. So he said back in, like, I think he was basically like the precursor to Schwarzenegger and Wilder and all the other like famous ones. He was, I guess, the first true I don't know, a professional bodybuilder, so to speak. So he actually competed, and he did his work at a time where steroids either weren't that well known or weren't widely available. So people like him relied mostly on diet. And he has this famous quote, which he kept repeating several times. He said, eating 2 to 3 dozens of eggs daily is indistinguishable from doing anabolic steroids. And I thought, like, well, not surprising, because that's about 5 to 7 grams of cholesterol a day. And assuming the cholesterol has about like around 5% conversion rate into testosterone in older people, in younger it's higher. That's basically, let's see, that's a lot. I mean, that's basically you're getting that's several hundred milligrams of testosterone daily. So not surprising at all. I don't know if anybody has tried this, by the way. I mean, cholesterol is available pretty cheaply on the internet. Maybe we can do like a quick test with that and see if it's true.
Well, one of the ways, I never talk about him, but there's a guy named Stefan Statsny, and I met him on Facebook, and he was actually one of the guys that got me into Ray's work. But the dude was just so ripped, like one of the most ripped people I'd ever seen. And he was like a huge proponent of eating many, many, many raw eggs per day. And because when I got encountered Ray's ideas, I was like, this can't be right. So I have to put my own personal spin on it. And that was like eating mostly raw foods. And when Stefan would like post big, like table size portions of all like the Ray Pete inspired foods. And I was like, oh, it's so cool. I basically copied him on like what my approach for posting photos of things. But he was an interesting person. I don't know what he's doing now, but he was, it just reminded me of him.
And the second portion of that post is about basically so one study, the first study is the one that showed the cholesterol is basically anabolic, and they say so, right, for muscle. And then, but they didn't propose a mechanism of action. And then somebody commented, like a doctor commented on the study and sent a commentary to the editor of the journal who published it. And that doctor's comments was, well, I think they did not control for saturated fat. And if they did, I'm willing to bet that it would have been the saturated fat that really had the anabolic effect, because saturated fat has been known to raise androgen levels in people. And substituting polyunsaturated fat for saturated fat plummets testosterone levels. So he didn't say castration. But then I found 2 other studies which actually did find that feeding animals polyunsaturated fat plummets their dihydrotestosterone levels. And the same group of people actually did a study with oleic acid, which is a PUFA. And they call it an anti-androgenic endocrine disruptor because in relatively reasonable doses, about 10 to 15 grams daily for a human, which you can easily get from your diet, they basically found that when it's fed to pregnant animals, it had a potent anti-androgenic effects on the male offspring. Like there are a number of different parameters that they look at. There's so-called the anodigital, like the urethral distance, and basically like this is a measure of like how high your androgen levels are. So this distance decreased strongly. It raised their prolactin, like it made the males grow like breasts. In other words, the rat version of gynecomastia. So they didn't mince words. They basically said that oleic acid, which is the lesser of the 2 evils, was an estrogenic and anti-androgenic endocrine disruptor. So, and I concluded the post by saying, well, FDA and many public health authorities have been warning us that male fertility has been plummeting over the last 3 decades. Well, what do you expect? I mean, we're being chemically castrated by diet left and right. It's perfectly reasonable.
Just like you might have touched on it, but what do you see as the main pro-estrogenic effect of the polyunsaturated fats? Is it the production of the prostaglandins?
No, actually, it's the structure. So one of the studies that I posted on the forum looked at steroids and fats and what their effects are in terms of basically the cellular activity. And so remember, hormones have non-receptor effects, non-genomic effects. You don't need the actual steroid receptor for a steroid to exert an effect. I mean, clear examples are progesterone, like inhibits lipolysis and basically increases the oxidation of glucose and increases thermogenesis. None of these effects are done through the progesterone receptor. They're all so-called non-genomic effects. So they looked at the effects of a variety of fats, and then they found out that the degree of unsaturation highly correlated with their degree of estrogenicity. So whatever effects estrogen was producing on the cell, polyunsaturated fats were able to achieve about the same effects. And I think the biggest effect is the more unsaturated the fat, the less lipophilic it makes the cell to be. So it increases the cell's affinity for water. And as soon as the cell's affinity for water increases and the cell starts to absorb water, that's a powerful signal for cellular division and de-differentiation. So one of the first things that you see in cancer cells is basically they start to uptake water, and that's what helps them. It helps them produce growth hormone, estrogen. It increases their ability to oxidize fats. All of these are basically are primal mechanisms that prepare the cell for division and growth, not for differentiating into whatever organ cell it's supposed to be. So the degree of unsaturation is actually what strongly determines the estrogenicity of a fat. And the less unsaturated the fat is, the more androgenic it is. So it's the same thing as seen in hormones. I mean, if you look at estrogen, it has 2 hydroxyl groups and 3 double bonds on the steroid core. If you look at dihydrotestosterone, it has 0 double bonds. This is not a coincidence. And you can see like most of the steroids that have detrimental effects, like cortisol or aldosterone, they either have too many hydroxyl groups, in other words, they cannot accept more electrons, or they have too many double bonds. In other words, they're unsaturated steroids and they act like polyunsaturated fats.
So just a minute, the double bonds is the thing that differentiates the types of unsaturated fats. And so like estrogen or the PUFA in the blood, if a cell is working, is very healthy, it can exclude things from entering it. But if its energy is interfered with, it will indiscriminately allow things to enter it. And that's allowing where am I lost here? Is the PUFA is entering the cell that way?
Yes, and also the ability of the cell to exclude things depends on its lipophilicity.
Okay.
And the lipophilicity of the cell, the affinity of cell for water, which comes from the blood, because the blood is largely a water-based medium, depends on the composition of the cell. So if the cell is composed largely of unsaturated fats, and if the phospholipids inside the cell are contained mostly unsaturated fats, in general, the cell will have higher affinity of water and will much more easily uptake things from the blood, including water. And that's what causes the swelling and the division and the cell division and the edema that you see with various disease processes and with cancer, which I think the tumor is like a Latin word for swelling or something like that. So that's not a coincidence. So that's all of this depends on the cell's affinity for water. Conversely, things that make the cell highly lipophilic, they stabilize the cell and make it much more resistant to viruses, to bacteria, to like particles like the nanoparticles that Ray wrote about in one of his newsletter. So the cell actually is capable of simply not letting these in, precisely because of its composition of the cellular structure. So it's the polyunsaturated fats act as a sort of detergent. They destabilize the cell and they make it much more permeable to almost anything that floats around in the blood, whether that's a virus, a pathogen of some sort, or even more quote unquote benign particles like carrageenan, like the gums, silica. All these things that we exposed on a daily basis have much easier time getting into the cell if its affinity for water is increased.
Sweet. What's the channel? Tim Berzin's Amplified Metabolism. He's like another Ray Peat inspired person, but he has a video on what we were just talking about, how the swelling of the cell is not only a huge sign of stress, but it's a sign to divide and to go into that primitive growth phase.
Yeah.
And that's why when you search the people that have low thyroid function, like those old photos, they're just like basically blobs, and they're like not differentiated, basically, just looking at them. Okay. What other articles did you?
I think the aspirin being as effective as Viagra. I think that's pretty interesting. Or at least I got a lot of emails about it. But it's a cool study from a.
You know what? Before you go, let me just do some announcements. Everybody, if you take 1 second and like this video, that really helps Georgie and I out. So thank you guys. Sincerely appreciate it. All super chats donated to Mr. Raymond Pete. So we'll send the money right to him. I think I've sent him over like $600 so far from these 11 episodes. Enter the Idea Labs giveaway by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. And we have been sending out so many different supplements, and that's all thanks to Georgie. So thank you so much. And again, we do these every other week, and the schedule is on the screen. And we're going to take a little break in November and December, but hopefully when I get a new computer, it won't be that long. And yeah, anything else, Georgie?
You mean there's the studies or like anything announcement on myself?
Any announcements just for the people that maybe missed the intro and are now coming here now?
I mean, that's pretty much my focus, like for the rest of the year. Make sure the first study comes out right, and line up at least 5 or 10 others for next year. I actually plan on writing to Ray and saying like, hey, do you have any, would you like to have anything tested that you've had this nagging question for a long time, and you want to test it directly? I mean, I promise we're not gonna skew the data in any way. We're just gonna send you the raw data, and you'll look at it yourself. So, should be pretty interesting.
But you're doing your own studies, and so we talked about this a little earlier on. But this is so cool.
I wanted to do this for a while because first of all, it's very hard to rely on studies these days because you don't know which one was influenced by pharma or was ghostwritten and whatnot. And I think Ray has a pretty good ability because he's lived through the entire process of the corruption of this industry, and he's seen some of the original ones. So he probably kind of has almost like a sixth sense, like of what study has been paid for and it's biased or even outrightly fake, and what study like kind of has a gist of truth in it, but me included, I don't, right? So I kind of rely, I'm relying on these studies, and I want some of the most fundamental ideas to be tested by me. I want things like the basic ideas that saturated essential fatty acid deficiency. It can be, first of all, like the original birth study wasn't really it was either purposely corrupted or actually didn't do good enough a job in discriminating between the effects of the deficiency versus deficiency in zinc, biotin, vitamin B6, things like that. We're going to confirm some of the protective effects of essential fatty acid deficiency, so things like endotoxin overload / sepsis, some lethal infections that are floating around. Like we're going to try maybe do an Ebola infection. I sent an email to Ray maybe 2 years ago, and he kind of laughed at Ebola. He said it's really if you're afraid of Ebola, you should be afraid of the flu as well. In a compromised, in a person with a compromised health, both viruses can be lethal. And I'm sure you've heard of people who've died from the flu, right? Oh, yeah. But we keep getting the story of it's usually the newborn or the very old, right? But if you look at, I've looked at some of the reports, the case reports on those people, and they actually had largely the same symptoms. They actually started bleeding from their gums, their nose, their ears, and even their eyes. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what some of the signs of Ebola are. Anyways, we're gonna do some of these core tests that many people have challenged Ray about. They've said, how do you're making your case on a study that has never been has never been tested. How do you know that causing PUFA deficiency protects against cancer? Well, we're going to test that too. So should be an interesting year. 2020 should be an interesting year.
Well, not to pry too much, but it's fairly expensive to do these studies, no?
I first tried to do them in the States because I wanted to be, I think physical proximity matters. Yeah. And I went to around a number of universities here in the DC area, and most of them actually flat out said no. Right? They said, we're not involved in that. If you're a pharma company, we'll think about it, right? Mm-hmm. And then the one university that agreed said, you have to sign this non-disclosure agreement that's about 400 pages long. Mm-hmm. And, clearly, it's not a wise thing to sign that without reading it, right? And I'm not a lawyer, but just the first few pages already gave me enough of information that I don't want to deal with these people. First of all, they get to own anything that the study comes up with. So you get to pay for the study, but the university owns any results that come out of it. Second of all, you kind of sign away your rights to talk about anything you see during the study, even if they're your own ideas. So they own you for life. I mean, there's no limitation on this NDA, and anything you develop in the future that the university determines may have been based on these ideas, then they get to go after you and sue you for royalties and damages and whatnot. So once you get into that system, you're kind of like they own you fully.
Yeah.
So then I tried China. The Chinese actually, to the delight of many people who are listening to us, they were even worse. They basically said, first of all, they asked for a lot of money up front, and there was absolutely no guarantee that they would do anything. And then I did a little bit of a background check on the 3 universities that did respond to me. And I asked some people that I know have worked with Chinese universities. They all came back, said, absolutely no way. We lost a ton of money. Nothing was published. And the one university that did do the study and took it to completion, if essentially held that the results hostage and said, give us more money or we won't publish it. And we're not going to give you the results. So anyway, so long story short, I kept shopping around basically and eventually found this group in Bulgaria, which kind of helps because that's my original home country, and they gave a decent price, and it looks like they're older researchers, and they don't seem to have ties to any pharmaceutical company or any industry in general. They seem to be just scientists, poor, starving scientists, and they seem to be genuinely interested in these things. One of them has basically both a PhD and an MD, and her specialty is lipids. So when I told her about the Burr hypothesis and the essential fatty acid deficiency, she laughed and said, "No, that's crap. We all know that's
Really?
yeah." But she thought that lard was like the really good fat. She's like, yeah, we know that animal fats are better. Like you do understand. Everybody understands that this is propaganda, and corn oil and all these things, they came because the agricultural industry, both during communism and in the Western world, was heavily subsidized. She's like, we know that, but we were told that we can't produce enough lard to feed the entire population. So you guys need to start publishing that vegetable oil is good. And then the other person actually is good friends of Gerald Pollack.
Yeah.
So they work on structured water together. And he's the one who basically has some interest in steroids as well. His big thing is testosterone. I kind of lean more towards progesterone, DHEA, and pregnenolone, but we can find common ground. And he and basically this one man and one woman, they've been doing these tests basically for lipids, the lipids effects on cancer and steroids effects on cancer. So, but they've kind of been working more towards the genetic hypothesis. And I said, well, what about the metabolic one? And they kind of said, oh, that's really interesting, but nobody's going to pay us to do that. Nobody believes in that hypothesis anymore. I said, there's at least one guy here. So we agreed on a price that was, reasonable in my opinion, and I'm paying out of pocket. It's entirely me throwing money towards science, and I have a good feeling about it. Like nobody's getting rich out of this.
Yeah.
They have no incentive to lie. It's very interesting to them because when they first started in this line of, I don't want to call it business because it's not a business for them. When they were first starting in science as very young researchers, the metabolic, which was the early 60s of previous century, the metabolic theory actually had a very strong foothold. And they were kind of disappointed to see it kind of getting crushed by the genetic hypothesis, but they also agree that genetic hypothesis hasn't produced much, and they want to work on the metabolic theory, but nobody will give them money to do that, right? It's not something that pharma companies or anybody out there is interested in. And Bulgarian scientists, they don't get much money to do studies anyways. So we'll see.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. Bulgaria #1.
Well, let's see. It's America through Bulgaria back to Bulgaria. Maybe something good will come out of it. We don't know yet. But I actually emailed Pollack. Actually, let me see. Yes, let me see if I can get the email.
Well, okay, so we're about an hour and a half in, and we have a few more articles, and then we'll go to the super chats. And but thank you guys so much for the chat is very lively, and a lot good stuff happening. So sincerely appreciate it, guys. And also, there are a number of extremely generous super chats. So we'll read those towards the end, and we really appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, so if you want to go to super chats, I'm just trying to look for the. Let's see.
Yeah, so speaking.
Yeah,
of,
so email his lab because he's not so basically, I emailed his lab and they responded back saying that this is very interesting. Yes, they know this researcher. They've worked with him for a number of years, and I don't know how many people know, but Gerald Pollack has held like a number of his conferences in Bulgaria because apparently, I didn't know that either. Bulgaria has like the highest concentration of natural spring water, of like mineral water springs per capita, like in Europe. And Mr. Pollack also believes that the water in there is whatever its structure. But anyways, it is a legitimate researcher, so hopefully we'll get some good results.
Dude, awesome. Okay, let's run through this. You want the aspirin as Viagra? We teased
yes,
it, but
this
we never
is
got into it.
good research out of a group in Turkey, and they've been doing this for the last, I would say, at least 12 years. Most of the original studies were on animals, but the last 2 studies were in humans. And actually, they found out that a low dosage of aspirin, just 100 milligrams, was actually more effective than Viagra as monotherapy.
Wow.
By a small margin, but still more effective, and without any of the side effects. So instead of, here's where, because they were testing also Viagra, I'm pretty sure they had to sign some non-disclosure agreement as well, and not bash the drug. So instead of recommending aspirin instead of Viagra, in lieu of Viagra, which is what I would have done if this was my study, then they say, well, let's combine them together because aspirin will protect you from the side effects of Viagra. So, but if you look at the results, they're pretty obvious. Aspirin monotherapy worked better than Viagra for erectile dysfunction.
Well, this kind of is similar to the video I made about the finasteride versus the carbon dioxide. Like these are, I mean, I'm sure they do a lot of different things, but Viagra and aspirin are working in totally different directions. Like one is pro nitric oxide, one is anti nitric oxide. And so it's like you can get things done in a harmful way, or you can get things done in a way that's helpful. And so that's like the big differentiator, but I know it's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, and but again, it's like when a study like this comes out, it'll be like, why wouldn't you recommend like aspirin for people? Like they already, like many people have a reason to take aspirin already. So it's like if you found out that this is better than Viagra, that should be the message of the study, not combine aspirin with Viagra. Steer them towards the better version. Like don't corrupt it.
It reminds me of the SSRI resistant depression. And then needing to add thyroid to the SSRI so they work.
Reverse it, right? Exactly.
Pretty hilarious. I mean, I'm not trying to be gross, but in San Francisco, whenever my girlfriend would come over, I usually take an aspirin just because I thought it helped with like general endurance. Like, or even if I were to exercise, I'd take an aspirin before because I always thought you could go for longer periods of time and become less tired. Like there was in like 2013, I hired a trainer. This was a way different version of myself, and he tried to like kill me every single time I went to the gym. And I'd be so sore for like 3 days after. But if I took an aspirin or 2 before going to see him, I'd be totally okay and wouldn't have any soreness. And so, yeah, man, do you want to calm any kind of fears about the common questions you get about aspirin? Because it's something that people are, and I know I was generally so prejudiced about.
So 3 studies came out over the last 5 years, huge studies with humans, and they found out the following. First study was, I think, was commissioned by the ProPublica, which is this journalistic organization that's associated with University of Berkeley, UC California, Berkeley. And then that study found out that the fears about aspirin are grossly exaggerated and likely driven deliberately by an unknown agent with an unlimited budget. I mean, I have to send you the quote. It was really remarkable. Like whoever came up with that sentence really knows what they're talking about, but they're kind of afraid of really saying like who is that agent with unlimited budget, right? And they said private agent, so it's not the government. So somebody else out there is publishing scary studies about aspirin and blowing the fears out of proportion. The 2 other studies came out and showed, number one, that aspirin So the two risks that every doctor will scare you about when it comes to aspirin is like it's gonna cause lethal bleeding either in your brain or in your gut. Those are the two things that every doctor will scare you with.
Yeah.
And the two studies actually looked at these two things independently. As far as I could see, the researchers don't know each other. I don't think they influenced each other's work, and found out that actually taking aspirin protected you from dying of bleeding in both brain and the gastrointestinal tract. So much for like the two really scary side effects that every doctor uses and every pharma journal uses to steer people away from aspirin. These studies found out that not only aspirin doesn't increase the risk of that, it actually protects you from dying of bleeding like in these two regions, regardless of the cause. Whether aspirin is contributing or something else, it probably something else because aspirin didn't increase the risk of bleeding. Actually, it was the opposite. So my take would be actually, if bleeding is your concern, studies have shown that lower dosage of aspirin actually have higher risk of bleeding. So because in lower dosages, the effects of aspirin are mostly they inhibit the platelet aggregation, but it's the higher dosages that are metabolically more useful because at the higher dosage, aspirin is much better at inhibiting prostaglandin synthesis. It's much better at inhibiting aromatase. It's not many people know, but salicylic acid, which is what aspirin gets converted into once you ingest it, salicylic acid inhibits the enzyme 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1. In other words, it inhibits the synthesis of cortisol, and that's one of its main proposed effects on why aspirin helps for diabetes. So diabetes is an endocrine condition by now. Everybody is probably guessing, driven by cortisol and a number of different stress hormones. In higher dosages, also aspirin uncouples mitochondria, so it has similar effects to thyroid. I think long time ago, I sent you that study on caffeine and aspirin working like similar to dinitrophenol, right?
Didn't it make the rats like more vigilant or something? It said like lowering
Yes,
ammonia, I think.
Exactly. Well, actually, it lowers testosterone and ammonia. No, not testosterone, serotonin. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so all of these are things that it's such a versatile ingredient. I think somebody emailed Ray and said like, if you have to take like between aspirin and progesterone, which one would you do? And he kind of responded like saying like, well, they're essentially the same. They're the same molecule, even though aspirin is much simpler in structure.
Well, last time I hit him up, I was like, what are the things you're thinking about right now? And he's like, oh, aspirin, caffeine, like in the form of coffee and progesterone. And then we talked about lidocaine a little bit, but that was like the newest addition. And you're right. But he immediately went for aspirin. This wasn't the quote I was thinking of. I'm looking for it, but he has here it is. It's like, the quote is, if a newly discovered substance had aspirin's anti-infective, anti-cancer, anti-stress, antioxidant, and anti-inflammatory actions, it would be the most researched substance in history.
Well, actually, it is the most researched substance in history. If you go and type aspirin into PubMed, I challenge you to find a substance that has the same amount of published papers. It's just not, so it's the most researched yet the least publicized. I think that's really the problem. It's like it's purposely kept out of the public's attention, and the only time we hear about it is that if you get like a blockbuster result, and then pharma immediately counters with like 5 or 6 or 10 ghost-written studies that immediately bring up the scary things about you bleeding to death and whatnot. But in terms of research, like even the official facts are on aspirin's site. I don't think there's any chemical that comes even close, just in terms of the sheer number of publications that are available on PubMed.
Yeah, I mean, we could keep going with this. What were there any other articles you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, the gut serotonin due to bacteria is the master regulator of metabolism, insulin sensitivity, and weight. I like this one because it shows that basically, it's been known for a while that sterilizing the gut, by saying known, it's known among the circle of researchers that do that basically that people who are obese, they have elevated levels of serotonin. They also have gut dysbiosis, right?
Dude, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Do you want to touch on, commenter says, aspirin raises eNOS and decreases inducible NOS. INOS has no vasodilation effect. So what this commenter is saying is that the endothelial nitric oxide is good and the inducible nitric oxide is bad. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I would counter with aspirin actually and salicylic acid in general. They first of all they inhibit the conversion of nitrates and nitrites into nitric oxide, number one, and also I think they inhibit the enzyme. Aspirin inhibits the enzyme arginase, which is the pathway through which arginine gets converted into nitric oxide. So even if that is true, it's been reliably shown that when you take aspirin, actually the blood levels of nitric oxide will drop. So through whatever mechanism, whether it's through the nitrite inhibition conversion or the arginase conversion, the arginase enzyme inhibition, the evidence that I have is that just like methylene blue, if you take aspirin, the blood levels of nitric oxide will drop. So I need to do more research on the enos to inos, but it may be immaterial. Ultimately, it's the amount of nitric oxide that floats around in blood that matters, and it seems like aspirin is lowering that pretty dramatically. And actually, at a lower dosages is better, which may explain why the baby aspirin has stronger protective effects against heart attacks than the higher ones, which seem to be pro-metabolic.
Well, this isn't the first time I've heard that, but I remember perusing through my notes and noticing that there were very pathological states that were associated with the ENOS. So I didn't pay that much attention to it. But regardless, like it's still going to have that vasodilation effect with the result being the inhibition of the mitochondrial respiration. Is that right?
Yeah. And also like usually like things that inhibit the prostaglandin synthesis, they do have vasorelaxation effects to start with. So there are many different pathways through which aspirin can actually relax the blood vessels. It's not just the nitric oxide. I think this is being purposefully pushed that aspirin somehow promotes nitric oxide, because this is currently like the molecule that's in vogue. Actually, it's been in vogue for a while. The nitroglycerin drugs for heart disease that have been in use since the 1950s, that is their main mechanism of action. I mean, they simply raise nitric oxide levels in the blood. And actually, older studies that before nitroglycerin was approved as a drug, they compared them with arginine, the amino acid, and they found out that taking 2 grams of the amino acid L-arginine daily has the same effects as taking nitroglycerin. And now nitroglycerin is actually being recalled in several countries, or at least they have like a black box warning, because it was found that even though it may like help in like acute stages where you're currently experiencing heart attack, if you take nitroglycerin chronically, it actually dramatically increases your chance of dying from a future heart attack. So you definitely don't want to be promoting nitric oxide. And aspirin, there's serious evidence that aspirin lowers the levels of nitric oxide in the blood. I already mentioned 2 mechanisms. Now, maybe the distinction between enos and inos, the effects on it, maybe it's not that important for the overall levels of nitric oxide.
And again, I would suspect that this picture of the nuances between the two is never including carbon dioxide. And so that is like the important thing that's usually left out, if I understand right.
Yeah, and anything that increases oxidative phosphorylation will increase the production of carbon dioxide. And even though aspirin increases glycolysis, it also increases the activity of the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. So the overall effects of aspirin are heavily pro-metabolic, heavily pro-carbon dioxide. So you don't need to increase nitric oxide. If you have carbon dioxide, your blood vessels should be supple, should be able to dilate without any problem, unless they're severely calcified. And at that point, there are other things that come into the picture, such as cortisol and aldosterone. Those have recently been shown to be the primary regulator of calcification of blood vessels.
Okay, I'm sorry to steer you in a different direction. I just wanted to touch on that real quick. Okay, so we're on the gut. Serotonin is the master regulator of the metabolism, insulin sensitivity, and weight.
Yep. If you type into Google TPH inhibitor diabetes, or TPH inhibitor obesity, or TPH inhibitor whatever disease you come up with, and you prepend TPH inhibitor to it, chances are there are currently clinical trials in place with these molecules, and the TPH inhibitor simply inhibits the synthesis of serotonin. So despite, and this study is really crazy because it kind of like the popular press article says, well, we all know that serotonin is really good for your brain and for your mood, but guess what? There is a bad type of serotonin, and that bad type of serotonin is in your gut. And I thought to myself, look at look at this deliberate manipulation of what the study actually says. Because the study itself doesn't say there are two types of serotonin. It's one type of serotonin. And it says 90% of it is produced in the gut, but still, there's only one type of serotonin that we're concerned with. Anyways, long story short, this study conclusively demonstrated that it's the benefits of antibiotics that, and when I started saying that it's well known that obese people have elevated serotonin, they have gut dysbiosis, et cetera, it's also well known in the scientific circles that do studies with antibiotics. Not many have been done on humans, but many have been done on animals, that animals with sterile guts are extremely resistant to diet-induced obesity. It doesn't matter if you feed them pure fat. It doesn't matter if you feed them fat and sugar. It doesn't matter if you feed them starch. It doesn't matter if you feed them deep fried cookies. Whatever it is you come up with, it is impossible to get these animals to gain weight. So for a long time, and these studies have been published. It's been at least 20 years since this topic became kind of like a fashion. But now the pharma industry and the medical industry have always countered with, well, it's the change in the gut microbiome that's really the problem, and we need to study the microbiome and change the composition towards a better bacteria. But no, this study actually showed that it's the serotonin that's the result of the endotoxin, which is the result of the bacteria. It's ultimately the primary driver of obesity / diabetes / insulin resistance / any metabolic problem that involves lowered metabolism. Ultimately, it's the serotonin that's the direct cause. So what they did is they had several groups of animals. Some of them get sterilized gut with antibiotics, and other animals had like serotonin completely inhibited. The serotonin is completely inhibited by the drug phenylalanine. I think Ray wrote about it once. It's para-chlorophenylalanine, the amino acid. Mm-hmm. So, and they showed that the anti-obesity, anti-diabetic effects in both groups were the same. Then they had a third group that got both the antibiotics and the serotonin inhibitor, and the effects were not additive. In other words, whether you inhibit serotonin or you kill the bacteria, ultimately, you achieve the same. So it was, and the group that had like gut dysbiosis but had its serotonin tanked by that TPH inhibitor, they actually also lost weight. Insulin resistance, insulin sensitivity was restored. Diabetes went away as well. So the study concludes that it is the serotonin that needs to be targeted as a direct target if you want to cure metabolic diseases. So you can worry about bacteria and like the different compositions of bacteria and whatnot, but ultimately, if this bacteria results in endotoxin, you're going to have a problem. So it doesn't matter how you change the microbiome composition, which is the hot topic right now. You should either completely kill it off, or, since it's not very practical, target serotonin. I mean, this is the more realistic target if you want to resolve metabolic problems. It's not by changing this one bacteria, this obscure species in the gut, and suddenly everything comes back to normal. It just doesn't work like that. And now they're doing genetic studies on the microbiome, trying to sequence the genome of the different bacteria, and trying to do CRISPR editing of genes of like specific bacteria. And there's thousands of different bacteria in your gut, right? And it's just the pharma and the medical industry, they love complexity because that's how they can hide behind it, ask for more money, and then when nothing comes out, they say, well, it's a complex subject, you give us more money, and nothing ever comes out of it. This study says enough of all of this crap about modulating the microbiome. Inhibit serotonin, and these problems will go away.
Yeah, I was the Joe Rogan interview with David Sinclair. Like he reverted to genetic determinism like a handful of times whenever he would talk about the specific genes that he had or whatever. And it was, again, I'm no expert, but it seemed like a cop out a lot of the times when he was talking about things. Like he's doing all these things for anti-aging, but then he'd say, me and my family have a certain gene that promotes longevity or something.
Well, ultimately, it's just a cover because the nobody wants to expose serotonin as a cause of a health problem, right? Because everybody serotonin has been promoted so much as the happy hormone that it will. In so many people are aware of serotonin, right? It's not a. It's like unlike many other things like nitric oxide or let's say like or aldosterone or some of the more obscure hormones. The general public is aware of serotonin. It's been ingrained into their mind by all these blog posts and doctors and FDA telling them serotonin is good for them. So if you come up with a study or if you start pushing the message that serotonin isn't as beneficial as we thought, the entire nation will hear you, right? It's not like talking about some obscure hormone and they will forget about it 2 days later because they don't know much about it. Serotonin is well known. Serotonin is a household name. I mean, so many people are taking SSRI drugs. If you start hitting on serotonin and saying serotonin is bad, you're going to have some serious questions coming up to you from the general public. You don't want that, right? If you're a pharma company, you don't want that.
Sweet, brother. Okay, so we're about almost 2 hours. And what other articles did you want to?
I guess the last one, that supplementation with saturated fats protects liver from alcohol. It's an extension, I guess, of the NANGI studies.
Yeah.
They quote some of the NANGI studies, by the way. And what I thought was cool was that basically, first of all, it shows that the way the alcohol damages the liver is by changing. So first of all, it increases gut permeability and increases endotoxin levels in the blood because of the increased absorption of endotoxin, right? But it showed that saturated fat, first of all, it restored the gut barrier, right? And other fats didn't. It was only the saturated fat that did. Number one. Number two, it had direct endotoxin effects that they weren't able to elucidate how exactly that worked. They didn't know. But they called saturated fat a B vitamin mimetic. Like basically it works somehow as a B vitamin. So it's like a B vitamin substitute or whatnot. And they basically said that, if you take a sufficient amount of saturated fat, it will prevent the lipid peroxidation, which brings us back to how we started this podcast.
Yeah.
It will restore the gut barrier, and it will get rid of endotoxin either by opposing it or binding with it directly or to whatever mechanism it is. But those are the three things that drive alcoholic liver disease and likely liver disease in general. And they stated in the study that even though they used alcohol, they think this is the same process that underlies NAFLD, NASH, right? And ultimately cirrhosis/fibrosis. So supplementation with saturated fat, and it wasn't some kind of an insane amount. It was about 20% of the diet, which is already what most people consume about 30 to 35% fat in their diet. But unfortunately, most of that fat is PUFA. So by simply making sure that about at least half of that fat is saturated, then it completely actually prevented in the one group and reversed the damage, the already existing damage in the group that was drinking alcohol chronically. So it's not that difficult of an intervention. All you need to do is skip one PUFA-rich meal a day, and you will probably be achieving that target. And according to your doctor, cirrhosis/fibrosis is irreversible. The only thing that can save you is a liver transplant. You're not in DC, but I don't know how it is in other cities, but DC is overrun by ads on basically bus stops and buses and even buildings. And most of the big universities in the area are really like their transplant departments are going like crazy. Like you see ads about kidney and liver transplants on every bus stop now, everywhere.
Really?
So it must be, well, first it's very profitable, but it must be, because of course they do their research too. It must be like a health epidemic of sorts, because you wouldn't be advertising if you didn't think you're gonna have like enough patients out there.
Yeah.
The hospital where I had both of my children were born, actually they closed one of the maternity wards and they gave it to the transplant department because that transplant department is going like crazy, and the maternity wards is shrinking. Like women are not having as many children as before, but it's now it's like all these people need organs transplanted. And I was looking at these stats because they were posted on the one in the hospital when I was there, like waiting for my second child to be born. And basically they said that about 40% of the patients that need a liver transplant are under 40 years old. So that's huge. That's like almost half of your population is people that should be, like, I don't know, healthy, running around, working, supporting the elderly, like not straining the health system. I think we're going to see a generational fight over healthcare resources very soon because the young have become the old, as I mentioned before.
Yeah, we've definitely talked about that. How I remember mentioning to my buddy, I was thinking of one of your articles that said millennials were the first generation that were more unhealthy than the ones before them. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
They,
and
they
my,
have, they have the health of people that are like 20 years older than them on average.
yeah. And my buddy was like he didn't believe it. And I was like, but I remember when like energy drinks came about, like I imagine the diet, and that was in my probably maybe my 20s. But like I imagine now people growing up like we were talking about, you're not even eating any real food anymore at all. It's just scary to think about when you draw that you go towards the conclusion of what's going to happen.
Yeah, most of the stuff you buy commercially, like at this point, even the organic stuff is heavily compromised. It's still a little bit better, right? But most of the stuff that's not organic, what you're eating is essentially stuff that's either been directly synthesized from like some very basic, it's essentially grown in a lab, right? But I don't want to use the word grown. It's not grown. It was synthesized. Or if it is of natural origin, but if it's something that's like powdered or reconstituted, you're basically looking at stuff that was broken down into its basic macronutrients. Then those were assembled, like all the vitamins, minerals, any other nutrient that may be in there, like a steroid, if you're eating organ meats and whatnot. All of this has been extracted, and then this food is reconstituted back into its original state, right? And then some of additional things like ferrous sulfate, some iron salts, some vitamins are being added, right? But it's still like even like it pales in comparison in terms of nutrition to what it originally was. So you're basically eating food that's being heavily modified and it bears very little resemblance to what the food on the label says it is. So when you're getting mashed potatoes, like powder mashed potatoes, that's not what would happen if you actually buy potatoes, like boil them at your home and mash them themselves. Like these two products will be very different. Like the reconstituted mashed potatoes from powder, they will probably be almost entirely starch and some iron added to them, not much of a potato.
Cool. Okay, let's jump to the super chats. And our friend Matt Blackburn is in the audience. Hey, Matt, how are you, sir? Okay, let's. So the first is that okay, Georgie? We didn't skip over any articles?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I mean,
Okay.
we got to the point where the other, I think we covered with Jahid last time.
All right, cool. Okay, first one from Mitch R for $4.99. Thank you so much, Mitch. Sincerely appreciate it. He says, if took combo, what does it say? If took combo birth control pill 20 years, will normal endogenous steroid production ever return after stopping? Would supplementing progesterone help restore? If they took a combo birth control pill for 20 years, would supplementing progesterone help restore fertility? I'm guessing.
That's a definite yes. Well, I shouldn't say it won't guarantee it. In terms of damage, unlike like testosterone or anabolic steroids, whose most of their negative effects about them are related to suppressing endogenous steroid synthesis, estrogen has some very dangerous effects of its own that go far beyond simple suppression, right? I mean, it's pro-fibrotic, it's pro-inflammatory, it leads to things like polycystic ovarian disease or polycystic ovarian syndrome. Many, like the official version is that this is something driven by androgens, but it's actually estrogen that's driving up adrenal function, and that's what's causing all these cysts to form. Whenever you have a cystic disease, estrogen is involved. Estrogen is the primary pro-cystic hormone you can produce. It's even serotonin doesn't come close. Serotonin is mostly related to like fibrosis and scarring of like liver and heart. So progesterone should help. It would really depend on how much damage has been done. But I think that can be easily checked by doing ultrasound on the ovaries and the uterus and seeing if there's anything out in there. Like sometimes because of like the long-term usage of estrogen, you would have a cyst in one or both ovaries and it's blocking eggs from getting from the ovary into the uterus. If that's the case, then I would try to higher dosage progesterone, which has been shown that in many, if not most cases, it can remove the cysts And if that is not happening, then you may have to have surgery to get those cysts removed because they're physically blocking the fallopian tubes. But in most other cases, progesterone, I think the starting dosage for infertility or cystic disease in the ovaries is around 100 to 150 milligrams daily. But keep in mind, most oral products have about no more than 15% absorption, like the products like Prometrium. If you're using progesterone in vitamin E and oil, the oral absorption rate is probably north of 80%. So keep that in mind. It's not that taking more estrogen than that will cause some kind of a harm, but it may make you too sedated. If you're driving a car, at least for the first few days until you get acclimatized to it, it may be like it may make you feel like you're drunk, right? But that effect tends to go away. So after the first week, you should be fine. But I'll make sure to use at least 100 milligrams progesterone daily.
Great. Thank you so much, Mitch. Shimon Frontal for €10. Thank you so much, Shimon. And they say, hey, Georgie, how are you doing? A friend is taking 50 milligrams of progesterone, or pregnenolone, 50 milligrams of DHEA, 30 milligrams of progesterone as a cream, and it raises his labs to the max, but he claims that he doesn't notice any difference. How can this be? Any ideas?
Well, I want to know, it raises like what labs to the max? Yeah. Is it androgens? Is it estrogen? I mean, is it the DHEA? It really depends on the cream composition and how much gets absorbed. And also so when you say like he doesn't feel much, like is it in terms of specific functionality? Like is his mood bad and he's expecting improvement? Is his libido bad? He's expecting improvement? I really need a bit more information about that. I mean, if the blood levels are getting back to normal, sometimes it is an issue of excess estrogen inside the cell, and the excess estrogen, while it's inside the cell, it can cause like the continued symptoms, even though your blood levels may be normal. Something similar happens with thyroids. Like if you can have like normal T4 or even T3 in the blood, but if you're inside the cell, you have high reverse T3, which is blocking the thyroid receptor. You can be functionally very, very hypothyroid while your blood work looks perfect, and your doctor is very happy. So for whatever issue, and whatever numbers are looking normal, but the person doesn't feel any better, I will do a test for prolactin and if possible, estrone or estrone sulfate. And if any of these two is in the upper 25th percentile or elevated, then I would suspect that there is a heavy intracellular estrogen, in which case I would either up the progesterone dosage, take some more aspirin and vitamin E, or worst case scenario, even consider like an aromatase inhibitor. But even the aromatase inhibitor will take a while for the cell to be able to get rid of the estrogen, even if you inhibit aromatase completely. I think a higher dosage of progesterone would be your best bet, because it can actually displace estrogen from the receptor side.
Two things. One, and I know I said it quickly, but he's taking 50 milligrams of DHEA. So again, we talked about that earlier, but that's
too much.
Probably way too much. And then two, this is kind of like, he actually has another super chat that we're going to get to, but this is kind of like commenting on a painting while driving by it. And so you really need to know symptoms, specific lab work, like the TSH, the total cholesterol, the prolactin, the parathyroid hormone, the vitamin D, serum phosphorus, maybe the iron saturation, or maybe the reverse T3. Then you need to know the symptoms, and then it needs to be compiled in some artistic manner. Okay, so again, this is Shimon Frontal for another €5. Thank you so much, Shimon. And they say, is there a harmful side being deficient in estradiol or E2 as a male? My labs arrived yesterday. My testosterone is good/high. Sex hormone binding globulin is right in the middle, but estrogen E2 is extremely low.
Okay. Actually, it's often when you have a really low estrogen in the blood, the cellular levels could be very high. And unfortunately, unlike females, where you can get a decent idea of tissue estrogen basically by getting the numbers of blood estrogen, there are specific ratios by which you can calculate depending on which phase of the cycle the woman is. For males, that correlation is not known. But I've seen cases, and actually I've emailed Ray about it, and I've seen studies that usually if estradiol is low in the blood, it is high in the cell. Two people that I know, both males, that have estradiol below the reference range. Both of them have really bad cases of varicose veins, and varicose veins are at this point conclusively linked to elevated estrogen. So, and one of these people started taking a high dosage progesterone and vitamin E, and then for about a week or maybe like even 10 days, because they were doing tests very regularly, their estrogen, their estradiol in the blood shot up to twice, like 2 times the upper limit of normal, and then it went back to normal. It didn't go below, but it went back to about middle of the range after about 10 days of taking 200 milligrams of progesterone. Considering that progesterone is almost impossible to convert into estrogen inside the human body, because progesterone is a delta 4 steroid. Humans synthesize estrogen primarily through delta 5, in other words, from DHEA. Progesterone cannot convert into DHEA. It can only go through androstenedione and then to estrone, etc. But in the humans, progesterone mostly stays as progesterone, or you may go into the cortisol pathway or aldosterone pathway, but those two pathways are heavily regulated. Progesterone usually stays as progesterone or goes towards allopregnanolone. Long story short, this person who had very low levels of estradiol on a blood test had really high levels on the same blood test while taking 100 milligrams of progesterone daily, and after about 10 days, his estradiol levels normalized, which to me is a sign, and considering he has very bad case of varicose vein on both legs, this is a sign to me that its tissue estrogen is probably high if it's low on the blood level. So again, I would test prolactin would be the best surrogate. Estrone is another one, because often, like when you have low levels of estradiol, one of the other estrogens would be elevated, like either estriol or estrone. That's why whenever somebody tests estrogen, I always ask them to test all three forms. And actually, even beyond that, there are actually additional metabolites like 16-hydroxyestrone, which for some reason is usually only measured on a urine test. But anyways, long story short, there's about 15 different types of estrogens, and all of them are perfectly capable of activating the estrogen receptor. So estradiol, while being the most potent and most well-known one, just measuring that by itself, it doesn't give you a very good picture of your total tissue estrogen reserves, total tissue estrogen tone, so to speak. It's usually prolactin that can give a better measure of that. So I would test that and see what the results come back with.
Guys, somebody's knocking at my door, so I'm gonna do a little please wait thing. I'm gonna go. They will not stop knocking, so I'm gonna go figure this out and mute us for a second.
Yeah, gringo too.
Okay, I'm back. Let me mute this. There have been a bunch of robberies on my street recently, so the neighborhood is like in a heightened alert,
Oh wow.
basically. Okay, so we're back. Okay, did you finish that last question?
Yeah, I was saying that basically they're, just because estradiol is low, it by itself has very little meaning. So like a number of different tests should, if you're gonna test estrogens, test at least all three of them. And if the lab is willing to do it and your doctor is willing to do it, sometimes they can pull up like there's a huge list of at least 15 different estrogenic metabolites that are also known to be activating the estrogen receptor. And often, like when you get estradiol low, one of the other ones will be really elevated. But you can start with the three estrogens: estrone, estradiol, and estriol, and see if any of these comes back up normal. Usually it does.
Uh, yeah, and like we said, like I feel like using Ray's information makes things so much easier. If your pulse and temperature are low, it's just like it's almost like given that your stress hormones have a generalized higher functioning. And so that's why it's nice to have the test. Like the high prolactin is always good to have and things like that. But again, especially with the estrogen, like you pointed out, it can be misleading if you're taking the test at face value. But again, if you just if a person just measured the cyclical changes in their pulse and temperature, and if they were generally low, since estrogen is one of the main things that decreases the generation of heat in the mitochondrial respiration.
Metabolic rate, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like a given that the estrogen is in fact not low and it's likely high. So that's why I'm so appreciative of Ray, because I think his information helps cut through just the bullshit,
But the reason I mentioned these tests is because actually it can help in your discussions with the doctors. Because doctors take these tests like as the Bible, right?
Yeah.
So if your estradiol comes back low, your doctor will be like, and let's say you tell your doctor you're taking progesterone or you're taking an aromatase inhibitor, doctor will like rip you apart. Will be like, no, stop these things right now. You're too low on estrogen. You're killing yourself with this stuff, etc., etc. But if you actually, if you get some tests that show your doctor your estrogen is not in fact low, because if you get the full panel, so the reason I mentioned is like many people will go to the doctor and get like a serum iron, right, test, right, and it will come back low, right. But then if you do the full iron panel, including the iron saturation index and ferritin, sometimes these come back as high.
Yeah.
And by that, when these three numbers come back, like if you only do serum iron, the doctor will be like, oh, take iron supplements, right? Your iron deficiency anemia. But if you do the full panel and you come back with high ferritin and high iron saturation index and whatnot, your doctor will not tell you to take iron. I bet you they will say, go give blood or like whatever it is, they will send you for more tests, but they will not tell you to take iron, which is the good decision, right?
Yeah.
So same thing here with estrogen. Like since your doctor goes by the tests, give your doctor what the doctor considers the Bible, if you want him or her to be on your side, right? I don't think these tests are like just like you said, pulse temperature, like basically like general like libido, quality of dreams, like basically cognitive function. All of these are highly indicative, much more reliable than the tests. But if you're dealing with a medical system, you have to speak their language, and they go by the tests. So find the tests that will show them that basically you're on the same page.
Good point. I didn't think of that. That's well said. Awesome. Okay, Steph M, our amazing, the best moderator who's ever lived, ever. $31.41. Thank you so much, Steph. You're constantly incredible, so thank you. DBO514, our buddy. Is this just normal American currency? CA, $5. Thank you so much. He says, the role of magnesium during thyroid deficiency, it seems to help a variety of neuromuscular disorders. Ray has said that it is a cofactor to thyroid.
Yep, but also you will not retain much of it if your thyroid is low. Remember, like magnesium is bound to ATP in the body. That's how it circulates. That's how it gets absorbed. So the amount of ATP you produce is directly linked to thyroid and actually NAD levels as well. So if you don't bring up your thyroid, you'll have a very hard time retaining magnesium. You can somewhat improve that retention by elevating NAD levels, which can happen by taking niacinamide or methylene blue or taking both of these together.
Mm-hmm.
But it still won't be near as good of a retention rate as if you increase your metabolic rate.
And the amount of NAD dictates whether the ATP is broken down. Is that right?
Exactly. And the amount of the NAD to the NADH ratio determines the function of that enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase.
Oh, really?
So it's basically like the higher that ratio, the more glucose you'll be metabolizing. And it's also NAD itself suppresses lipolysis.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the main mechanism through which niacinamide lowers lipolysis. Many people have sent me emails saying there is no evidence that niacinamide directly is anti-lipolytic. There is evidence for niacin, but there is no for niacinamide. And there isn't, of course, that's kind of true, because if you go and look at the studies, it will show you that niacin activates some specific G protein coupled receptor, which actually fatty acids activate as well. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of almost like a negative feedback cycle. The free fatty acids and the niacinamide act like a fatty acid and inhibits lipolysis. Uh-huh. There is no such evidence for niacinamide. But if you look at the older studies done in the 1950s and earlier, you will see that they did studies with NAD and niacinamide, and both of these had anti-lipolytic effect. Mm-hmm. And because neither niacinamide nor NAD activate this receptor that niacin does, the proposal, the explanation of these older studies was that the effect was metabolic. In other words, by changing the redox status towards oxidation, it's known to favor the oxidation of glucose, and it suppresses the oxidation of fat.
Sweet, I didn't know that. Thank you so much, DBO514, and that was Canadian currency. I'm just I was educated in American school, so I don't know that much. Pure Therapy for $49.99 and no message there. Thank you so much. Extremely, extremely generous. And we'll just forward that right to Ray, so thank you. Schwan Frontal again. He says, I took so many antibiotics till now, but I'm becoming gas right in the gut from sugar. Can a vitamin deficiency be the cause, since my gut seems clean? Can I comment on this? I think being deficient in vitamin D can have symptoms and signs that a person might, like myself, mistakenly reach for a antibiotic when in fact, it's just some kind of deficiency. In my general experience, but what do you think?
I would also try a different antibiotic as well. Sometimes actually the bacteria does adapt. It's not that it becomes resistant so much, but if you take the same antibiotic over and over, the bacteria, depending on, you may be taking an antibiotic that's not broad spectrum enough to kill that bacteria that's overgrowing in your gut. I think some people take too much, rely too much on the tetracyclines, simply because Ray has talked so much about them, right? How they're like a quinone molecule and has a number of different beneficial effects. But in my experience, the penicillin antibiotics and the macrolides actually seem to work much better for intestinal issues than the tetracyclines. I know some people who got really bad constipation from taking doxycycline chronically. They thought they had Lyme disease, right? Mm-hmm. And it gave them really, really slow bowel movements. But then they switched over to amoxicillin or even plain penicillin, or they took clarithromycin, which and then both of these work like a charm, and then their health was their gut, the digestion, the speed of bowel movement was restored. Another thing that could be tried, you can try the camphoric acid. You can try buying it online before we release our product and see if that helps. I've already given it to 2 people with they claim they have candida overgrowth, which is another hot topic right now in the blogosphere. And for both of them, it did improve bowel movements, which suggests it does have antibiotic effect.
Yeah, so I would concur that the different antibiotics I've taken all seem to have slightly different effects. And so, yeah, that is good. And then again, but this is the same person that was talking earlier about the estrogen and things like that. So if there is systemic dysregulation of everything, it's almost there might be a lot of things to correct.
Oh, speaking of estrogen, you just reminded me because I was reading an older study about like what causes, because it's known that older people have increased gut permeability, even if they don't drink alcohol, like if they don't do these things that are known to increase the permeability. And older studies found out that it's the estrogen that's intimately involved in destroying that gut barrier. And they like older studies gave the animals an aromatase inhibitor, or like basically they suppressed their ovarian function, but then they gave the animals extra progesterone, and then their gut function was restored, like basically bowel transit time, etc. Like it came back to normal. So it's like, so there's, if estrogen is elevated, digestion by default is slow, and this is confirmed by people with high prolactin who are known to almost always have severe cases of constipation.
Somebody posted a link that was what you just said, the hyperprolactinemia being associated with constipation. So I think that's,
yeah, it's a case. It was a case study, but then that was like from in 2015, and I followed up on that. There are recent studies with more people showing that one of the common complaints in people with hyperprolactinemia is constipation, and the reason is that prolactin elevates blood calcium levels, and when you have like basically elevated blood calcium and but an elevated parathyroid hormone and elevated prolactin, which is they all go together, that contributes to constipation as well.
Sweet. Good stuff. Mashal Guinskina for $15. Thank you so much, Mashal. I'm sure I'm butchering your name. They say, great show. Thank you. Why is progesterone slightly unsaturated? Is it better to suppress a mild 102 Fahrenheit fever with no other symptoms, or let it run its course? So these are two different questions, basically. So one about why is progesterone slightly unsaturated, and then about what to do about 102 fever.
So it has only one double bond. It's on position 4, between position 3 and 4, right? So it's a delta 4. It's known as delta 4 steroid. Pregnenolone also has one double bond, and so does DHEA, and so does testosterone. So I guess you can compare progesterone to a MUFA, to a mono unsaturated fat, but it also has 2 carbonyl groups, 2 ketone groups, and both of these have affinity for withdrawing electrons. So it's essentially its pro-metabolic effects highly outweigh this one double bond that is between position 3 and 4. And so it's this one bond is not enough to make it estrogenic, number one. And number two, its pro-metabolic effect vastly outweigh any potential negative effects from this one double bond that is there. And finally, estrogen is not known in humans to convert into estrogen in any measurable amounts. Just that delta 4 pathway, which goes through androstenedione, is not well expressed in humans. It is highly expressed in rodents, though. So giving progesterone to rodents actually is highly anabolic for them because it reliably feeds into the testosterone pathway. Testosterone is also a delta 4 hormone. So just because progesterone has one double bond doesn't automatically make it bad. Number two, it's almost impossible for it to convert into estrogen in the human body. And also the 2 ketone groups make it essentially a quinone molecule. So similar to methylene blue and the tetracyclines, it will withdraw electrons, and any oxidizing agent speeds up metabolism. That by itself has potent anti-estrogenic effects because better metabolism means better function of the liver, more glucuronidation, more excretion of estrogen, less activity of aromatase. So you'll be synthesizing less estrogen to start with, et cetera, et cetera. As far as the fever, it really depends on the age of the person. Like a baby, like under the age of 1, that kind of fever can be dangerous. Anybody older than 2, but younger than, let's say, 65, it's probably okay to have that level of fever for a few days. But it really depends. I mean, like I would be watching carefully for things like upper body rashes. If that starts to develop, that's usually a very reliable sign/symptom of viral meningitis. And while the viral version of meningitis is less dangerous, and most people survive it, it could still be dangerous. And there are things that can be done, like the hospital can do, like keep you on IV fluids and things like that to prevent swelling of the brain, which is the most dangerous part of the meningitis. It can also sometimes you can have a rash in bacterial meningitis, which is very dangerous, and you have to get intravenous antibiotics because it can be lethal. It's really dangerous, bacterial meningitis. So the most common symptom is rash. So anyways, very young and very old people, this kind of fever would worry me. Anybody like from a small child over the age of 2 up until a senior citizen is probably okay for up to a week. But after that, if that continues after that, I would go and get it checked out. Usually, restricting tryptophan reliably lowers the fever, and it's been shown that actually the fever is the body's response to deplete tryptophan and iron from the blood. And it turns out it's iron and the blood that are really vital for an infection to proceed, to propagate. So doing things that lower both of these things in the blood can be highly protective. It just so happens that aspirin can do both. It can lower both serum iron and serum tryptophan. And I think that may be one of the reasons why Ray has been recommended to people who basically asked them similar questions, said, "Hey, I have high fever. It's been going on for a while. We think it's infection. What do you recommend?" I've noticed that aspirin is always one of his recommendations. Methylene blue is another thing. Not only it has a very broad anti-inflammatory profile, it also has powerful anti-pathogen effects, both against viruses and bacteria and fungi, which is why it's used to sterilize the aquariums. And just a few drops, especially if combined with exposure to red light, may be able to kill off that infection and drop the fever pretty quickly.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Marshall, for that. Nikita Homyak for $10. Thank you so much, Nikita. And they say, how to reduce edema for someone with cancer?
Urea, in my experience, is the most effective way. And actually, you can do it topically, depending on if the cancer is closer to the surface. If it's not, then basically extra sodium or extra urea, 1 tablespoon 3 times a day, in my experience, is pretty reliable. I've had people send me pictures of basically tumors on people's necks. Mm-hmm. It's usually like some kind of a lymphoma. And then basically they rub a urea solution on it, mm-hmm. and they drink this 1 spoon, they dissolve it in something. It's very bitter, so you have to dissolve it in something very sweet, mm-hmm. Yeah, depending on how much you can tolerate bitter taste. But 1 tablespoon 3 times a day shrunk that edema to like more than like 2/3 of the original size, which shows you that most of the tumor is really water. Mm-hmm. So that Latin word for tumor, which means edema, is spot on. It's mm-hmm. a very accurate description. Other things, rubbing progesterone on the area, if it's close to the surface, progesterone happens to be highly, very helpful for edema. And pregnenolone, in my experience, is even better when it's an internal thing. It's basically somewhere the tumor is growing on an internal organ. It cannot be accessed directly. So urea and pregnenolone would be great internally, and progesterone. Externally, urea and progesterone would probably be the best thing.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Nikita, for that $10 super chat. Our buddy Matt Blackburn for $9.99. Did he contact you about an interview, Georgie?
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes, we already scheduled something.
Looking forward to it. I've received lots of positive feedback from going on Matt's show, so I appreciate him. I wish he had dropped his channel. I'm sure you can find it in the chat, but you should go subscribe to his channel. Matt Blackburn for $9.99. He says, has Haydet looked into systemic enzyme therapy for cirrhosis, the serapeptase, nattokinase, etc.?
So these things have some good research behind them, but it's still relatively young. And I'm a little bit concerned about the nattokinase studies because they seem to be coming out mostly out of the soy industry in Japan. Mm-hmm. Similar to vitamin MK7, where most of the research seems to be sponsored by the dairy industry in the Netherlands or the soy industry in Asian countries, mostly Japan, because MK7 is extracted from these two industries. It's almost like a waste product. So I would like to see more independent research on it. Serrapeptase, it seems to be more useful for things where there's a lot of necrotic tissue buildup, and calcification as well. So it's probably more effective for like removing plaque from blood vessels than reversing liver damage. For liver damage, since fibrosis is mostly driven by serotonin, at this point, Pfizer has already proven through their clinical trials that 5-HT2B antagonists, such as tergoride, which is a member of the ergot family, similar to LSD, to bromocriptine, to lizaride, etc. So any kind of a potent serotonin antagonist will probably be pretty good at reversing liver fibrosis, even very advanced stages. Then there's also the older studies with testosterone and vitamin B1 curing more than 70% of terminal cirrhosis in patients. I have those posted on the forum as well. Saturated fat, the NANGI studies, which we just covered in this podcast, they were shown that even in human alcoholics who had like completely cirrhotic liver, giving them saturated fat not only reversed their cirrhosis, but it did that in the presence of them continuing to abuse alcohol while they were in treatment. So that may be like the simplest and cheapest approach to like dealing with liver disease. Simply like taking like a tablespoon of coconut oil a few times daily. However, I've looked at those studies, and even though some of the more modern studies were with medium chain triglycerides, the older studies, like the first study by Nanji, I think was from 1985. He did use beef tallow and then butter, and found that the beef tallow, which contains longer chain saturated fats, such as similar to the study that we just discussed on the podcast today, they were more effective. I don't know why. I think it's probably because the medium chain triglycerides get metabolized very quickly. They get metabolized almost like sugar. So when you ingest the medium chain triglycerides, good portion of it may be absorbed and metabolized in the stomach and the small intestine, and not even get a chance to get back to the liver. So you may just go directly into the lymphatic system and or metabolized by the cells in the stomach and the small intestine as fuel. So if you want to target the liver, you have to deliver sufficient amount of saturated fat to the liver, and that usually happens more reliably with the longer chain saturated fats like palmitic, stearic, margaric, even arachidic. So beef tallow, if you can get pure palmitic acid or stearic acid, would be great. So yeah, ruminant fat in general is probably a better bet.
Sweet. Look out for the Dinkov cast with Matthew Blackburn. Thanks so much, Matt. Before I read this last one, I'm going to hound you guys to please like this episode before I do that. And again, subscribe if you're not. There's like a surprising amount of people that win the Idea Lab stuff that aren't subscribed. So I don't fully understand that, but just something to think about. But yeah. Okay, this one is from Agency Stored in the Balls for $9.99. Thank you so much, Agency. And they say, could heavy adolescent usage of marijuana have negative effects on serotonin levels or proper usage by the body in the gut and brain? Could that usage lead to Crohn's-like symptoms later in life?
I don't know if it can lead to Crohn's symptoms, but marijuana in chronic use, especially daily and in higher amounts, is heavily serotonergic. There's no question about it. It's also anti-androgenic, so for a male, it's probably not a good idea to abuse this on a daily basis. It can have a number of good effects. One recent study found out that smoking weed dramatically increases synthesis and levels of brain pregnenolone. But it seems to be as a result of the organism simply using pregnenolone as an antidote to cannabidiol, which is the main tetrahydrocannabidiol, which is the main active ingredient in marijuana. So that chemical binds to the CB1 and CB2 receptors and acts as almost like an endogenous endorphin. And pregnenolone was found to block those receptors or act on them as an antagonist. So the benefits of marijuana mostly seem to be related to initially lowering stress hormones. It does have some pro-GABA effects and increasing the synthesis of pregnenolone in the brain. But when chronically used, especially at higher amounts daily, it has been shown to reliably cause, at least in animal models, cause infertility in both male and females. So I'll be wary of it of abusing it, quote unquote. Depending on I think there was a study which showed that in males that consumed basically that smoked every other day, one blunt a day, for lack of a better expression, they didn't have any long-term increase of risk of psychosis. But people who smoked every day, they had a 3 to 4 times higher risk of developing schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder. Now they didn't look at the hormonal profile, but considering the recent studies with pregnenolone for treating schizophrenia, and schizophrenia being recently conclusively linked to serotonin excess as well, I think that speaks volumes about what chronic abuse of marijuana really does to your brain and what pathways it activates.
And that could definitely, not definitely, but theoretically lead to Crohn's later in life.
So Crohn's disease, any kind of inflammatory bowel disease, you're likely to have elevated serotonin, right?
Yeah.
And whether Crohn's, so it could be multiple causes of Crohn's disease. The latest one that is being currently investigated is of bacterial origin, right? But if you have elevated serotonin, at the very least, you're going to get irritable bowel syndrome, which is the famous condition that everybody seems to be having these days. And a new study have come out that has shown that if you have irritable bowel syndrome for more than 10 years, it is likely for that to convert into inflammatory bowel disease, which is you start developing these lesions in your colon and your small intestine, or even in your stomach. That's what Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis are. And serotonin is heavily involved in that process. Like if there are lesions / fibrosis somewhere in your gastrointestinal tract, serotonin is involved as a cause. Yes.
Okay. That is the end of that. Parting words. So just to remind everybody, Nicholas Simpson will be on the stream on the 4th. And then Georgie and I will hopefully do the 11th as our kind of parting for the year stream of November and December. And that's all contingent on when I can purchase a laptop that's powerful enough to run the streaming software. And so again, we don't want to stop doing these or anything. It's just kind of a little bump in the road because I'm traveling. But the chat has probably been like the best I've ever seen. So I thank you guys so much. It's just been really active and I think highly intelligent. So thanks, guys. Georgie, parting words.
I think I've said this for the last 4 times, but I'm seeing some good signs in the medical industry in general, even though it's spurred by bad reasons. Like it's usually money involved, right? But serotonin is now more and more starting to be viewed as a cause of depression, as a cause of disease. Metabolic theory is starting to become more and more popular as a research topic. Genetics, despite of what you see on the news, seems to be less and less funded by the federal government. You can easily verify that because most of the federal funding information, actually all of it, is publicly available. So you can see what funds went to what firm doing biomedical research and what topic of the research is. So in general, I think the medicine is changing direction and changing for the better. I don't know how quickly that is happening, and the pharmaceutical industry is still capable of putting up a pretty good fight. The aspirin studies are a good example. We're starting to. I don't know if you mentioned it, but I think it was 2 shows ago. Aspirin is now officially recommended in the United Kingdom healthcare system as officially effective for preventing cancer. So that was the first health system in the world to do that. And we're still seeing publications that aspirin shouldn't be used by most people because it's dangerous, it's causing bleeding, etc., etc. But up until if you asked me 2 years ago if I thought aspirin will ever make it as a drug for like treating or preventing cancer by any healthcare system, I would have said flat out no. Well, that's changing, and the UK healthcare system is considered as the second most developed in the world after the United States. So things are moving in the right direction. So and just in general, like keep in mind simple changes, simple and cheap changes in your life can have dramatic effects. You don't need to go out of your way and load yourself up on supplements. And I know it sounds strange to say this is a supplement vendor, but many times simply being cognizant of what you eat and skipping even one bad meal a day and changing it into something better like dairy or like animal protein or animal fat instead of the vegetable one can have dramatically beneficial effects on your health. So many times you don't even need to see a doctor. Doctors are becoming endangered species. At least the primary care physicians are. So yeah, I'm more optimistic than I was a year ago.
Sweet. I had kind of a shitty day today, but you guys cheered me up, and especially Georgie. So I sincerely appreciate it. And again, from the bottom of my heart, we're nothing without the viewers. And so the fact that you guys constantly come out and show your support by just inhabiting the chat, I sincerely appreciate it. And yeah, it means so much to me. And Cardo Chav had one last super chat for $1.99, but had no message. Thank you so much for that. That's it. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks with Nicholas Simpson. And yeah, take care, everyone. You guys are amazing. Oh, I'm sorry. One last super chat. Michelle, I'm going to butcher your last name again. Gunskina for $5. Thanks so much, guys. Crowdfund that research from Bulgaria, Georgie.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Much appreciated.
Awesome, guys. You guys are incredible. Talk to you guys soon, and take care. Oh.
What happened?
I just let me mute us.
Oh, okay.